Chapter 167. The venue of the competition was at the foot of the western wall of the town. In addition to Roland, the spectators included Iron Axe, Sir Pine, Brian, and all the members of the Witch Union. There was also a fat pigeon squatting on the watchtower. In order to avoid accidental bullets, everyone had to climb up the wall to watch. The two contestants, the Chief Knight Carter Lannis and the Extraordinary Ashes, would fight one-on-one near the wall. Carter's attire was not the usual knight armor, but a close-fitting leather coat, with a custom-made holster around his waist and a revolver on each side. There was also a dagger on the back of his waist, which could be used in an emergency. But Roland knew that if he had to use a dagger to fight with an extraordinary, it would be better to directly admit defeat. Ashes was still dressed as usual, a black robe covered her body, and her long black hair was tied into a ponytail, naturally hanging down her back. It seemed that she did not care that this would create unnecessary weaknesses for herself. The only difference was that the big sword, the cloth wrapped around it had been unwrapped, and the dark brown sword had almost no light. As Roland expected, the surface of the sword was uneven, not like a well-made weapon, and due to lack of maintenance, the place where the sword was cut had rust spots. The two walked into the field, and Carter constantly adjusted his position until he was more than 15 meters away from his opponent. At this distance, he had more than 80% confidence in hitting a fixed target. Taking out two pistols, he finally checked the bullets and the firing nozzles. Roland let Echo imitate and amplify his voice. The rules of the competition are very simple. Stop when you go too far, you are not allowed to hit the head, and you can admit defeat. As long as you don't die on the spot, Nana's healing ability can quickly restore you to your original state. Are there any questions? He waited for a moment, and seeing that the two had no objections, he then said, "After hearing the bell, the competition begins." Ashes silently looked at her opponent. As an extraordinary, most of the time she followed her instinct to fight. After following Tilly, she also learned fighting skills from the court's master swordsman, but she always felt that these skills were of little help to her. The other party was the chief knight by the prince's side, but he did not carry the usual sword, shield, or spear on his back. He did not even wear armor. The weapon in his hand was extremely strange, but based on its shape, it was obvious that it was not a dagger-like melee weapon, so there was only one possibility left. It should be similar to a crossbow, a long-range weapon. Crossbows posed no threat to extraordinaires. This was something Ashes had learned from many battles. If it were a light crossbow, she could even catch a flying bolt with her bare hands. However, looking at the prince's confident expression, the weapon in the other party's hands was definitely not as simple as a crossbow. Her instincts were telling her that she had to get close to the knight as soon as possible and not wait for him to attack first. Therefore, before the start of the duel, Ashes inserted the front part of her sword into the ground. This posture seemed harmless, but it was the most effective way to deal with the archers. At this moment, a clear and melodious bell rang from the city walls. Ashes moved almost at the same time. She held the hilt of her sword with both hands and slammed it forward. Soil, grass, and gravel rose with the broad blade, splashing in the direction of the knight, forming a muddy smoke screen. The chief knight's reaction was also very fast. The weapon in his hand burst into flames and made a loud roar, but Ashes did not see anything. Either the other party did not load an arrow, or the arrow was so fast that she could not detect it. Compared to the first almost stupid mistake, she was more inclined to the latter. Under the cover of the muddy smoke screen, Ashes sprinted from the side. In the blink of an eye, the distance between the two was shortened to half, and at this time, the muddy smoke screen had not completely landed. Most people would subconsciously avoid the overwhelming amount of mud. As long as she could interrupt the other party's shooting, she would have won the battle. But Carter did not move from his position. He ignored the sand hitting his face and narrowed his eyes as he aimed his weapon at the approaching supernatural being. Then he pulled the trigger again. With a roar and a flash of light, Ashes reflexively took a step to the side. She still did not see the arrow that had been thrown at her. At the same time, the knight did not prepare to pull the bowstring or load an arrow. This new type of weapon could probably be fired continuously, but after missing 2 shots in a row, the outcome was already decided. The last 10 steps were also covered in the blink of an eye. She raised her sword vertically in front of her, stomped her feet on the ground, and charged at the knight like a bull. Such an impact would not kill him instantly, but it would be enough to knock him out. Even if he managed to hold on with his strong willpower, the shattered bones in his chest would make him completely lose the ability to fight. In this last breath, the opponent's third attack exploded in front of Ash's eyes. She only felt a fierce shock on her sword, making a crisp buzzing sound, and then her right abdomen was numb, as if she had been grabbed by something. Almost at the same time, her whole body hit Carter's chest, directly knocking him out, drawing an arc in the air, and rolling to the ground. Only then did she have the time to check the injury on her waist. But just as she lowered her head, a strong sense of dizziness came to her brain. She staggered twice and almost fell to the ground. The power brought by the extraordinary magic seemed to be flowing away like water, and her limbs became extremely heavy. Ashes used her sword to support her body. The numbness of the wound had turned into a burning pain. Her waist seemed to be missing a part, and she could even see her bright red internal organs. Only by clenching her teeth could she not let herself fall. In Roland's eyes, the whole process of the match was only 4 or 5 seconds. He saw the extraordinary witch pick up the soil debris towards Carter and at the same time launch a charge from the other side, change direction once in the middle, and then hit the knight's body. Carter had shot a total of 3 bullets before he was hit, which was beyond Roland's expectation. In the face of the unusually fast Ashes, he was afraid that it would be difficult to even keep his eyes on the opponent's figure, but he was still able to aim and shoot, which fully proved that the title of Chief Knight was not undeserved. The first 2 missed shots were normal. In fact, if Ashes changed direction several times at this speed, Carter was afraid that he would not be able to hit his opponent. The key was the third shot. In the last 5 or 6 meters, Ashes blocked a straight line hit with her sword in front of her chest. If it was a crossbow, even if it was a heavy crossbow, at this time, at most the sword would be nailed, and it would have no effect on the extraordinary. But the 12mm caliber ammunition plus the steel bullet at this distance burst out with unparalleled power. At that time, Roland only saw the black debris splatter, and Ash's side burst into a cloud of blood. When she stood still, the prince found that half of her waist had been lifted off, as if she had been bitten by a demonic beast. Her intestines had slipped out, hanging on her side. There was a bowl-shaped hole in the lower half of the sword, probably caused by the bullet hitting the iron sword and passing through it. The unstable bullet, together with the flying iron filings, rotated into her abdomen and opened up a huge wound. Even though she was seriously injured, she still did not faint, and insisted on standing on the field. The extraordinary witch's physical fitness was indeed terrifying. If it was the previous lead bullets or small caliber bullets, perhaps she could rely on her body to withstand it. Maggie rushed to Ash's side, wanting to support her, but unfortunately, because of her short stature, she could only hold her legs, her face anxious. Nana had already rushed to treat Carter. Roland also quickly walked in front of Ashes, who was still holding on. She seemed to be waiting for this moment. Chapter 168. Go away, you filthy beggar. Someone pushed her hard, but she did not move an inch. Instead, she watched as the other person staggered 2 steps back. The arrogant look on his face immediately disappeared. After glaring at her fiercely, the other person left dejectedly. She was unmoved and continued to move into the crowd. Seeing this woman in tattered clothes, most people frowned and avoided her. Just like that, she slowly moved to the inner city gate of the Kingdom of Grey Castle. There was already a sea of people here. Although the inner city did not have a traditional city wall or gate, people still erected a symbolic gate made of wooden strips and garlands. On both sides of the gate stood a row of warriors in full body armor. The exquisite armor reflected a dazzling luster under the sun. The hollow, eagle-shaped armor on their shoulders and the iris decorations on their chests, coupled with the handsome faces of the warriors, caused a group of rich girls to shout and scream. The warriors were all wearing red fur cloaks that dragged on the ground. From afar, it looked like a red wall. It was these handsome and mighty warriors that separated the crowd, leaving a path several feet wide behind the gate. Flags were fluttering on the side of the road. Many long golden flags hung from the top of the flagpoles, giving off a solemn feeling. There were many different patterns embroidered on the flags, most of which were towers and spears. She knew that this pattern represented the royal family of Grey Castle, which was also the host of today's ceremony. Today was the coming-of-age ceremony of Princess Tilly Wimbledon. As early as a week ago, this matter had already spread like wildfire, and everyone in the city knew about it. Other than the local nobles of Grey Castle, there were also many envoys from other kingdoms. They brought gifts and marriage contracts, hoping to win the favor of Princess Tilly. The church would also send a bishop to preside over this ceremony, which would be held in the Dawn Square in the center of the city. At that time, the royal family would give out meat porridge and thick soup, which was also the reason why so many people were attracted. But she did not come for food. Her target was the archbishop. Presumably, killing an archbishop in front of the eyes of the kingdom would definitely make the church lose face and greatly damage its prestige. The sweet taste of revenge always made her excited. She touched her chest. There was a short knife that she had stolen. Although it was of low quality, it was enough to kill a mortal. Suddenly, an earth-shattering cheer came from the crowd, interrupting her thoughts. She looked towards the inner city and saw the Royal Knight Regiment marching neatly towards her. The knight who was walking at the front was dressed in shiny clothes. Their red cloaks with golden edges fluttered behind them like clusters of leaping flames. Behind the knight was a carriage pulled by 4 horses. The walls of the carriage were engraved with the emblem of the Grey Castle royal family. The wheels and frame of the carriage were gilded. A bright red triangular flag fluttered on the roof, and silk embroidered with golden threads hung from the 4 corners of the carriage. At a glance, the entire procession looked like a moving golden ocean. The crowd followed the convoy to Dawn Square. She was also mixed in the crowd and entered the periphery of the square. The inner circle had been isolated by the guards. Only the nobles could watch the ceremony up close. She estimated that it would only take a few seconds for her to rush over. As long as the archbishop stepped onto the square, he would not be able to escape from her. The children of the royal family jumped out of the carriage. Those who slowly walked onto the central platform were probably the 5 children of Wimbledon III. Among these people, she saw Princess Tilly Wimbledon. There was no doubt that the 5th princess was the main character of the day. Her eyes shone with a lively light, as transparent as a gem. Her neat side-parted bangs matched her refreshing gray long hair without any accessories. Her appearance was especially outstanding among her siblings. The patterns on her dress were not complicated, and it matched her temperament perfectly. And the most incredible thing was that she actually looked past the layers of the crowd and directly at herself. Then, she nodded slightly as if greeting her, and a smile appeared at the corner of her mouth. This was definitely not an illusion. In an instant, she had the same feeling. This feeling was incomparably intimate, as if they were friends who had known each other for many years. It was warm and sweet. It did not come from the recognition of blood, identity, or status, but from the resonance of magic. Unconsciously, she let go of the hilt of the knife and quietly watched the woman on the platform. After the ceremony, 2 guards found her and wanted to take her into the palace. As long as she had the intention to refuse, the guards could not stop her. But she did not ask anything. She followed the 2 into the inner city, and finally entered the magnificent palace from a side path. In a secret room of the palace, she stood in front of Princess Tilly. So that's how it is. What an unfortunate story. So that's how you ended up in Grey Castle. Don't worry, you don't have to wander anymore. You can stay with me. I will give you a good makeup and make sure that they will never recognize you again. I have inquired about it. The monastery was destroyed by fire and all the children are missing. The whole building is in ruins and ashes. Did you have a name before? In that case, I will call you Ashes. When Ashes opened her eyes, the first thing she saw was Maggie's face. Maggie blinked and then hugged her. You finally woke up, Koo. She tried to move her fingers. There was no feeling of weakness or numbness as she expected, and there was no sharp pain in her waist. How long was I in a coma? An afternoon, Maggie said. Nana said that as long as you are cured, you can wake up at any time. But at this time your body will be very tired. Let it take its course and rest for a while. When you wake up, it will be much better for your energy to recover. Ashes patted Maggie's head and slowly sat up from the bed. She opened her clothes and found that her abdomen was intact. The huge wound was like a nightmare. When she woke up, it disappeared without a trace. How did she cure me? I guess you don't want to know. Maggie curled her lips. When she saw Ash's determined eyes, she said, they collected your scattered, parts and filled them into your stomach. Then Nana used her magic to restore them to their original state. I heard from Lightning that the more parts she collected, the faster she can cure them. If a limb is completely lost, she can't make it grow back. Ashes felt goosebumps all over her body. Then the dirt and grass that got stuck on it are also. After the wound heals, the dirt is discharged outside. Her ability seems to be able to distinguish what is useful and what is useless. She breathed a sigh of relief and rolled out of bed. She tried to feel the strength of her body. The result was just like Nana said. After waking up, she didn't feel weak. Instead, she felt stronger than ever. Ashes put on her black robe, looked at the sky outside the window, and walked toward the door. Where are you going? Maggie asked. Chapter 169. In the office, she once again saw Roland Wimbledon. He was immersed in writing something, probably dealing with government affairs. At this time, the sun was already setting in the west, the sky was dyed with a touch of gold. The afterglow passed through the glass window, leaving a long shadow in front of the table. Until the prince put down the quill, Ashes opened her mouth and said, I won. Indeed you won. The other side simply nodded. Such a straightforward attitude surprised her a little. She thought that Roland would quibble. She didn't expect him to recognize the result. But I admit that you have the ability to fight against the God's Punishment Army. She said, the God's Punishment Army is not invulnerable. Their strength and body are similar to mine, but they lack the ability to think, which is why I can deal with 3 of them at the same time. According to the previous test, if the knight's opponents were the God's Punishment Army, I think they would only attack from the front. Therefore, the God's Punishment Army can't be sent alone like the army of judges. If I'm not wrong, the church needs to send someone to lead them in battle. Thank you, Roland smiled. This information is very important. What is the new weapon in the hands of the knight? A flintlock, he said. In the future, my soldiers will use this weapon. Even an unarmed farmer can defeat a well-trained army of judges with a flintlock. Ashes hesitated. Can you give me a flintlock? Only if you join the witch union, Roland said. After all, this kind of thing is still very rare at present. The other's refusal was expected. She exhaled. I must meet with Tilly as soon as possible. Tomorrow morning, I will leave Border Town. If you can't hold on, you can move to the fjords to take refuge. He nodded. You too, don't forget to tell this news to my dear sister. There is still a place for witches in the western region of Grey Castle. Ashes was silent for a moment. I will think about it. Just as she was about to leave the office, the prince stopped her. Wait, I have a gift for you. It's behind the door. Gift? Startled, she turned around and saw a huge sword placed by the door. Because it was blocked by the door, she did not notice it when she came in. Your long sword can no longer be used, so I asked Anna to cut one for you. This isn't an inferior pig iron sword. It's made of pure steel. Indeed, its entire body was smooth and uniform, reflecting an orange-red metallic luster under the setting sun. She walked forward and gently stroked the sword. She could see that the thickness of the sword was very uniform, and there were traces of quenching on one side of the blade. There was no doubt that this was an excellent quality weapon. The only thing that puzzled Ashes was its shape. Compared to the standard double-edged sword, it only had a blade on one side. The other side was about the width of a little finger, without a sword tip, and its head was trapezoidal. Most peculiar of it all was the front of the sword. Besides the strange talisman markings inscribed on it, there was a round protrusion at the side of the blade that hadn't been sharpened, and it was painted gold, causing it to be extremely striking. Although she didn't want to admit that she liked it, she couldn't help but reach out and pick it up. Why does it look so strange? Because this isn't an ordinary weapon, Roland said with a smile. Its name is Ash's Emissary. Compared to your previous white greatsword, it can be regarded as a legendary item. Ashes decided not to delve into the inexplicable words that came out of his mouth. In that case, I'll accept it. In return, I'll give you a gift. What is it? The prince asked curiously. She didn't answer and left the room. Early the next morning, Roland opened the door and saw Nightingale sitting at the desk with a piece of dried fish in her mouth. They're gone. Both of them left. Yes, she answered languidly. She was on her way at first light, and Wendy went to see her off. Roland couldn't help but feel a little emotional. Wendy was full of concern for any of her sisters, not to mention the witch who had saved her from harm and indirectly helped her escape from the monastery. He had thought that Wendy would leave with Ashes, but he didn't expect that she would be the first to refuse the other's invitation. In the end, the witch union still had 12 people, which filled Roland with enthusiasm. Do you think they will really tell the news here to the witches on the other side of the sea? Maybe they will, maybe they won't. He leaned back in his chair and let out a long sigh. But when they encounter difficulties that they can't solve, they will always think of Border Town. Closing his eyes, Roland went through the memories of Prince Roland in his mind. Tilly didn't walk close to him, or rather, she kept a certain distance from everyone, even Wimbledon 3. In addition to her beautiful appearance and outstanding intelligence since childhood, there wasn't much information left in his mind about her. When Princess Tilly began to secretly shelter witches, and when she planned to go to the fjords, Roland didn't know anything. But no matter what, she was a natural ally that could be won over. After all, fighting against the church was their common goal at this stage. As for sending Theo to spread the news, it wasn't in vain. The awakening of witches was a random event, and it was impossible for Tilly to take away all the witches. Especially after the withdrawal of the organization, the newly awakened witches would be even more eager to find a place to live. Now that he knew the information about the God's Punishment Army, the next thing he needed to do was to expand the production of the double acid. More efficient gunpowder and explosives couldn't be separated from nitric acid and sulfuric acid. After the first army changed to a revolving rifle, the rifled barrel with fixed bullets would greatly improve the shooting accuracy. Therefore, the significance of training became particularly important. In the era without the suppression of the barrage, a veteran with excellent archery was worth 10 recruits who randomly shot. At that time, the consumption of bullets would be an astonishing number. Moreover, the black powder would remain in the barrel, blocking the rifling and reducing the service life of the barrel. Only smokeless gunpowder could solve this problem. The early smokeless gunpowder was actually nitrocellulose, and later it was a mixture of nitrocellulose and nitrocellulose. Now, the amount of nitric acid used to soak the sealing collodion was quite insufficient, not to mention replacing all of it with collodion. After all, the laboratory method could only be used for small-scale production. If they wanted to meet the needs of the army, industrial production was necessary. Unfortunately, in the face of a completely unfamiliar chemical industry, Roland couldn't think of any good solutions. In addition to this, education couldn't be neglected. Not only the popularization of primary cultural knowledge, but also ideological transformation needed to be implemented as soon as possible. The natives had gone through the test of the months of demons, and with the propaganda of the First Army, they had a higher recognition of the witches, but the outsiders still accepted the ideas instilled by the church. Nowadays, the foreign population of Border Town was increasing rapidly, especially the serfs. They were still living in wooden sheds by the Redwater River, which could be regarded as the outer city of Border Town. But once they were promoted to free people, they would inevitably gradually move into the city. At that time, it would be too late to change their ideas. He had to come up with a kind of moisturizing and silent transformation method that could be easily accepted by the general public. After thinking for a while, he opened his eyes and suddenly found that Nightingale was watching him from the side. The moment their eyes met, she subconsciously turned her head away. "Yes, I forgot to tell you one thing," the witch looked out of the window, pretending to be nonchalant. "Wendy asked me to pass on a message to you." "What?" Roland asked. Chapter 170. The sun slowly sank into the mountains, and night fell on the western region. The emissary delegation found an open space not far from the road and pitched their tents. Soon a bonfire was lit in the middle of the tent. The warriors took off their armor, stretched their tired bodies, and sat around the bonfire to boil water and cook porridge. Alicia came into the tent with a basin of hot water. "Lady Priestess, please wash your face." "Thank you." Mira nodded with a smile and dipped the towel into the water. "We'll arrive at Border Town tomorrow. Thank you for your hard work. Compared with dealing with demonic beasts, this is nothing," she replied. "But your riding skills impressed me. I thought the priestesses were not good at traveling." "Haha, I'm not a natural priestess. When I was a merchant, it was common to travel on horseback." Mira wiped the dust and sweat from her face with a towel and handed the basin to the female warrior. "You wash your face too. How are you feeling now? Are you feeling better?" "What?" Alicia was startled. "It's about the God's punishment army." The priestess smiled and shook her head. "Your mood is written all over your face. It's because of Abram's words, right?" She took the basin and did not answer. "We will encounter a lot of difficulties and challenges. If we can't overcome these thresholds, not only the church but the whole world will suffer. In order to stop those terrible enemies, sometimes sacrifices are necessary," Mira said. "This is a dilemma, but don't forget the church's motto. Choose the lesser of two evils," Alicia whispered. "Yes, to measure whether the price is worth it depends on the purpose. The most important thing is that the conversion ceremony of the God's punishment army is completely voluntary. When Abram's brother decided to join the God's punishment army, he was ready to sacrifice himself for the church. This is a noble ideal. His name will also be engraved on the tablet of glory and be passed on with the glory of the church." "Thank you for your guidance." Alicia put her right hand on her chest. "I feel much better. The priestess is right. They are all dedicated to follow the glory of God. No matter what the result is, at least the God's punishment army followed their beliefs." Thinking of this, she felt the depression in her chest dissipate a lot. "As long as I can help you," Mira chuckled. "Let's go out and enjoy dinner. They should be ready by now. To be honest, I've been eating porridge so much that my tongue can't even taste it." "Fortunately, today is the last day," Alicia said with a smile. "Tomorrow, we should be able to enjoy the Lord's personal hospitality and a sumptuous dinner." After the tasteless dinner, the presiding judge selected the night watchers for the night. The judgment warriors who were not assigned any tasks went into their tents and slept early. Alicia was no exception. She and the priest returned to the tent, extinguished the oil lamp, and covered themselves with bedding. After an unknown amount of time, when she was in a daze, she suddenly heard a soft muffled sound, as if something had fallen to the ground. Soon, the second sound rang out. This time, she also heard the sound of the armor hitting the ground. It was not obvious, but it was definitely not an illusion. Her eyes flew open. Alicia quickly grabbed the two-handed sword beside her and slowly moved to the side of the tent. When she was about to lift the corner of the tent to see what was going on, she heard the roar of the presiding judge. "Enemy attack! Warriors!" The roar broke the silence of the night, and the camp instantly boiled up. Then there was a loud noise. The presiding judge's voice stopped abruptly. Without hesitation, she rolled out of the tent and saw that the presiding judge's sword had been split in half. No. Not only his sword, but the presiding judge himself had also been split in half. Blood spurted into the sky. Under the light of the bonfire, he knelt down weakly, his body split in two, and slowly fell at the feet of a woman. This woman with a strange giant sword was the attacker. Her whole body was covered in a black robe, and her face was covered by a hood. Under the shadow of the brim of the hood, Alicia could only see a pair of golden pupils shining. Two more members of the Judgment Army rushed forward, but in front of that terrifying weapon, their resistance was futile. The enemy killed a warrior with a single slash, and the man and the sword were cut in half. The loud noise came from the moment the weapons collided. Sparks and debris flew everywhere, followed by the sound of the blade rubbing against the flesh and bones. This nightmarish sound almost froze the female warrior's blood. "It's a witch!" someone exclaimed. She was the only enemy. She dared to attack the Judgment Army with her own strength. Except for the fallen who had obtained the power of the devil, there was no other possibility. "Take the priest away." A calm voice suddenly came into Alicia's ear. She turned her head and saw that it was Abram's. "You actually want me to abandon my companions and leave?" Alicia stared at him with wide eyes. "Otherwise, you will only die here for no reason, don't you understand?" He frowned and growled, "The enemy is not afraid of the god's stone of retaliation, only an extraordinary has this ability. I will try my best to stop her. You take the priest and go in the direction of Longsong's stronghold. Remember to take the main road, and immediately call for help if you encounter a caravan camping." With that, he rushed towards the enemy with his sword. "Extraordinary," she gasped. According to legend, only the god's punishment army could fight against them, so if they encountered an extraordinary, they should immediately ask for help from the local church. Alicia knew that he was right. Staying here would only make their sacrifice in vain. 5 of her teammates had already fallen on the field, so the remaining Judgment Warriors changed their strategy and used the tents and terrain to fight, which could buy them a little more time. But she knew that in front of an extraordinary who was far stronger and faster than them, it was only a matter of time before they were destroyed. She gritted her teeth and rushed into the tent, pulling Mira, who had already put on her shoes and was waiting for the news, and ran to the place where the horses were tied. "What happened?" the priest asked in a deep voice. "An extraordinary attacked the camp. I must take you away." She turned over and mounted the horse. "Please hurry." However, it was impossible to see the road clearly at night, so if they ran wildly on the bumpy road, it was easy to trip and break the horse's leg. If they jogged, they would not be able to run far before the enemy caught up with them. Alicia decided to let the horses run along the road, while she and the priest sneaked into the woods on the side of the road. In the absence of light, it would not be easy to find them. The sound of weapons clashing gradually faded away. She took Myra's hand, relying on the dim moonlight to distinguish the surrounding environment, and continued to go deeper in the direction away from the road. Maybe they would encounter beasts or poisonous snakes, but it was better than encountering witches. It wasn't until the two of them arrived near the impassable mountain range that Alicia felt slightly relieved. The other side didn't seem to be chasing after them. Apart from the annoying bird cries above their heads, the surroundings were completely silent. "What should we do next?" Mira asked. Even at this time, she still did not appear to be too flustered. This calmness made Alicia admire her. "My lady, we can find a leeward place here, temporarily spend the night, and wait until dawn to return to Longsong's stronghold to seek support. Don't you want to go to border town to avoid danger? It will take at least 1 day and 1 night to go back from here." "No need," Alicia shook her head. "The extraordinary came too coincidentally. I suspect that the Lord has already colluded with the witches. It is too dangerous to go to border town now." "What you said also makes sense." Alicia suddenly froze, her eyes looking straight behind the female warrior. Chapter 171. Devil. Alicia unsheathed her two-handed sword and stood in front of Mira. "Devil?" Her tone was cold and almost emotionless. "Then what about you who send orphans and abandoned babies to the monastery to be raised and choose witches from them? What nonsense are you talking about?" The female warrior scolded. "The church takes them in out of God's mercy. If there is no monastery, how many of them can live to adulthood? However, the pervasive devil always corrupts the weak-willed among them, leading a very small number of people astray. Once someone is found to have degenerated into a witch, the church will immediately deal with them. You have completely reversed the cause and effect." Hearing the word "deal with," the witch's golden eyes instantly dimmed a lot. She raised her giant sword with one hand. "I don't have much interest in persuading a dead person, so be it." Before her voice fell, the owl spread its wings and flew up. Her figure had already rushed in front of her. Alicia deeply remembered the tragic scene of her teammate who had been split in half with his sword. Instead of retreating, she pounced towards the lower right side of the extraordinary. In the swordsmanship training class, the instructor had more than once mentioned that the lower right side was the most difficult position to take care of. Because of the limitation of the sword holding posture, if you want to change the direction of the blade, you need to spend an extra half a breath of time. Like a leopard, Alicia pounced to avoid the witch's direct slash. When she passed the witch's side, she held her two-handed sword horizontally, trying to counterattack. But the extraordinary's reaction was amazingly fast. With a light jump, she easily avoided this horizontal sweep, at the same time turning around to lift the giant sword. Until this time, Alicia had not even completely landed. Everything happened in a flash. Half of her calf flew into the sky along with blood. A tearing pain came from the lower part of her body, almost making her lose consciousness. Relying on her instinct to tightly clench her teeth, the female warrior did not cry out on the spot. The gap was too big. She now understood how powerful Abrams was, who was able to fight with the extraordinary for more than 10 swords, giving her the opportunity to escape. Alicia struggled to turn over, just in time to see Mira take out a crossbow from her backpack, raise her hand and aim at the extraordinary witch who was paying attention to her. This was her last chance. She realized that she might be able to attract his attention. Just as the female warrior was about to say something, the great sword swept past her like a whirlwind. She felt her throat tighten, and then the world turned upside down. No, perhaps she was flying. She saw her body weakly kneeling down. At the same time, she saw an owl swooping towards Mira, but in midair, it transformed into a girl and viciously smashed into the priest's body. Her vision quickly blurred, and she finally fell to the ground, falling into endless darkness. This damned rock coup. Maggie touched the bump on her head and complained, "You were too careless. If it wasn't for me, you would have been shot by that arrow." "Don't worry, I've noticed it. I just want to finish this quickly." Ashes quickly dug a shallow pit with her sword, dragged the two of them into the pit, and covered them with soil. Both the god's stone of retaliation and the golden dragon were now in her bag, so she had enough money to travel to the port of Clearwater. She also found a letter on the body of the woman wearing the priest's robe. Glancing over it, she found that if the Lord of the Western Territory, Roland Wimbledon, did not collude with witches, she would ask him to buy baby girls and orphans. Before this, the other party in this transaction was the Duke of Rhine. As long as they were underage women, they could pay the market price, or they could use pills to offset the price. After reading the letter, Ashes sneered, put the letter on the torch and lit it, directly burning it. "Let's go, we still have a pile of bodies to bury." Maggie turned back into an owl, taking Ashes with her to the first place of attack. Digging, transporting, burying people? Maggie couldn't help much with these physical tasks. Moreover, the smell of blood and broken limbs made her a little dizzy, so she could only land on a branch and watch Ashes busy herself. "Why are you doing this? If the church finds out, wouldn't it be terrible? When they find out that the emissary group has disappeared, it will be 2 or 3 months later," Ashes said while shoveling the soil. "Generally, when the church sends out an emissary group to investigate the witches, if the Lord cooperates, it will last for more than a month, plus the time it takes for them to return, it will be almost 2 or 3 months. But His Royal Highness will certainly not cooperate with them." "You'd better turn back into your human form and talk to me again," Ashes sighed. "If the Lord allows the emissary group to enter Border Town, the witches of the Witch Cooperation Association will inevitably be exposed. The emissary group doesn't need to ask the prince himself, they only need to catch the people and interrogate them. Roland can either sell out the witches and lie that all of this has nothing to do with him, or he can only catch them all. If the other side is prepared in advance, as long as one of them escapes, Hermes will soon receive the news. You can also see that they are also carrying carrier pigeons. Pigeons can't see at night, so I have already caught them." Maggie patted her bulging waist bag. "When they are cooked tomorrow, we will each have one." Ashes secretly shook her head. She had never seen her catch a bird to eat before. She had only been in Border Town for a few days, but she unexpectedly had a strong interest in roasted bird meat. If the church decides to send out the army, he will only have about a month left. But now, as long as his luck isn't too bad, he can at least have 3 more months. So, this is my gift to him. It is also my revenge against the church. "So that's how it is, as expected of Sister Ashes," Maggie praised. There was one more point that Ashes didn't say. In this way, it was equivalent to her making the decision for the prince. When the church found out that they had lost contact with the emissary group, they would certainly blame it on Roland Wimbledon. At that time, even if he wanted to sell out the witches, he wouldn't have the opportunity. When everything was ready, the sky was gradually turning bright. "So, we will part ways here," Ashes said. Maggie was stunned. "What?" She touched the other's small head and squatted down. "You like Border Town very much, don't you? With Lightning and Vendy, you will certainly be very happy here." "But," the other lowered her head, looking hesitant, "I also like you and Lady Tilly." "I don't want you to stay here all the time," Ashes smiled. "Roland Wimbledon and Tilly are different. After all, he is an ordinary nobleman. It is difficult to guarantee that he will always stand on the side of the witches. This is also the task I want to give you. Once a month you will fly back and tell us what happened in Border Town, at the same time bring our news back to the witches of the Witch Cooperation Association. In this way, the two sides can also establish contact. If the town is in danger, you can also help them escape from Grey Castle and go to the fjords." "Is that so?" Maggie blinked. "That's it," she nodded. "I believe you can do it." Chapter 172. That's all for today. Class dismissed. "Goodbye, teacher," the little girls said in unison. Irene closed her textbook and watched the children walk out of the classroom. This place originally belonged to a noble family, but after the months of demons, it was expropriated by the Lord, and now it had been transformed into a college. The partitions of the small rooms downstairs and upstairs were connected into several larger rooms, which could accommodate 4 to 6 groups of apprentices at the same time. According to the division in the textbook, they were called classes. During the day, most of the students were children, and at night, it was adults. She thought that it would take a long time for her application to be a teacher to reach the city hall, but she didn't expect that after Philin reported the matter, the next day she got the approval. Then she went to the city hall to register her identity, receive her teaching materials, and get a class list. She was responsible for teaching the children of the townspeople. In order to make this group of troublemakers listen to her class, she spent a lot of effort. There was also a chapter in the textbook on how to maintain classroom discipline, which was an eye-opener for her. In addition to the traditional verbal criticism and cane corporal punishment, there was also the evaluation of excellence, the division of groups, the establishment of a team leader and class monitor, and so on. The person who wrote this textbook must be an elder who had studied teaching for many years, so he could consider everything so well. Walking out of the college, Irene saw the knight, Philin Schilt, waiting for her at the gate. He was no longer wearing a shining armor, holding a shield and a sword embroidered with a lion emblem, but he was still very handsome. A simple leather coat set off his tall and straight figure, coupled with his well-defined facial features. Even if he was empty-handed, he was still the light of dawn in her memory. After giving him a hug, Irene noticed that Philin's expression was a little strange. "What's wrong?" she asked. He hesitated. "His Royal Highness invited us to the palace in the afternoon to enjoy tea." Irene was startled. "We?" She immediately guessed what he was worried about. She patted his back and shook her head. "His Royal Highness has never seen me before. How could he be like the Duke? Besides, don't I still have you?" Philin nodded. "This time, I'll protect you." In the afternoon, Irene dressed herself up simply and chose a decent dress before heading to the Lord's castle with her husband. He was ushered into the guest hall by the guard. Not long after, a gray-haired man appeared at the entrance. Without a doubt, he was the Lord of the Western region, His Highness Roland Wimbledon. He was accompanied by a lady who was about 30 years old and had a calm and capable posture. From her charming facial features, one could tell that she must have been an outstanding beauty when she was young. The two of them hurriedly got up and bowed. "Welcome, Mr. and Mrs. Schilt." Roland sat down at the head of the table. "The dishes on the table are all palace delicacies. Feel free to enjoy them." "Thank you for your invitation. It's my honor to come here and enjoy the refreshments." Philin replied in accordance with aristocratic etiquette. "This lady is called Scroll." She's also the person in charge of the City Hall's education department. I think you should have already met her. Indeed. He nodded to Scroll to show his respect. I haven't thanked you yet. Without your permission, Irene wouldn't have become a teacher so quickly. So it was she who had helped me, Irene thought, and gave her a grateful smile. After chatting for a while, Philin tentatively asked, I don't know why your Royal Highness called us here. It's related to education. Roland paused and looked at Irene. I heard that you used to work in the Longsong Stronghold Theater. Are you an actor? Irene didn't expect that His Royal Highness would ask her this question. I've only performed once. It's like this. I plan to put on a play in the town square every weekend, the prince said directly. As for the script, the scriptwriter, and the conductor, I'm only missing performers. You don't have many classes, but you have experience in theater. I want you to star in this play. Of course, there will be extra pay. I don't know if you're willing? Irene looked at His Royal Highness in disbelief. After confirming that the other side wasn't joking, she excitedly nodded and said, Your Royal Highness, I'm willing. Standing on the stage and performing had always been her wish. After leaving the Longsong Theater, she knew that she might never have the opportunity to perform in a play again. In front of Philin, she didn't show any regret. She just hid her wish in the bottom of her heart. She didn't expect that there would be a day when she would return to the stage. These plays are performed for the masses, so the requirements aren't high. As long as the story is clearly told, it's fine. Do you have any friends in Longsong Stronghold who have a certain understanding of theater, but don't have the opportunity to perform on the stage? If you do, you can write a letter to them saying that in Border Town, there are performances every weekend, and the salary is the same as in the Longsong Stronghold Theater. Even they can do it? I know a lot of them. Irene was overjoyed. I'll write to them when I go back. If they can get the opportunity to perform, I think they will be very happy to come to Border Town. Very good. Roland handed over 3 books. This is the script. There are numbers on it. Your performance will start with the first story. The content is adapted from Scroll, very close to the lives of ordinary people. You can take it back and read it carefully. If there is anything you don't understand, you can ask Scroll. Yes, Your Royal Highness. Thank you. Irene bowed. Is this okay? Scroll asked. Those stories are obviously what you came up with. It doesn't matter. In their eyes, the prince can't write such vulgar things. Roland stretched, and without your final revision, the script can't be completed in a short time. I don't think the story is vulgar at all. She shook her head. Although I don't know why you know so clearly, those are the things that happen to the people, touching and thought-provoking. The performance will certainly be very popular. Of course it will be very popular, Roland thought. The first 2 plays were adapted from Cinderella and The Rooster Crows in the Middle of the Night, and had been tested by the people for a long time. The former described the touching love between the common people and the royal family, and the latter was the struggle of the people at the bottom against the unscrupulous landlords. Of course, they had been localized adaptations, such as the witch in Cinderella became a witch, and the landlord in The Rooster Crows in the Middle of the Night became a fierce little aristocrat. Roland intended to release the 3rd work, The Witch Diaries, after the first 2 plays had a profound impact, which was also his real purpose. This was a play completely conceived by him, telling the story of 3 children who became witches, but each went on a completely different path. He did not directly mention the church, but focused on the fate of these 3 people. 1 child was abandoned by her parents, 1 was used as a tool, and the last lucky child's parents still loved her deeply, and in order to protect her, they gave up their lives. In the end, the 3 people came together by chance, defeated the enemies who wanted to kill them, and obtained their own happiness like ordinary people. Chapter 173. When they returned home, Philin shook his head helplessly. Can't you think about it for a few more days before you answer His Highness? When he saw his wife come back, she was almost jumping up and down. The last time he saw her so happy was probably at the wedding. No, Irene stuck out her tongue, I can't sleep even if I'm late for a day. Yes, she loved the theater so much that when she was in the Longsong Stronghold Theater, She often practiced until midnight and often rehearsed her lines with herself. If it weren't for the Duke, she would have already changed from the flower of the theater to the star of the theater. Thinking of this, he gently hugged his wife from behind. "I'm sorry." Irene patted his head. "It's not your fault. At that time you were transferred to another city. There was no way to stop him." She smiled gently. "If you want to apologize, go cook. I want to read the script first." I'll cook." Philin kissed her earlobe. "Meat porridge and fried eggs, plus a roast sausage to celebrate." Many of the furnishings of the new residence were different from the ones he was familiar with in the past, such as the cooking stove. In Long Song's stronghold, whether it was a noble or a commoner, they would always have an open hearth in the center of the main living room, unlike the new residence, which had a separate room for the stove. The stove was surrounded on 3 sides, and the back was directly connected to the chimney. There was a horizontal baffle at the entrance, which could be closed when not in use, to prevent the smoke of the residents downstairs from coming out of the stove. Philin could easily think of the advantages of such a design. After closing the door, the living room could not be affected by cooking fumes and smells, and in summer it could also effectively reduce the indoor temperature. He filled the stove with firewood and sawdust, raised the flame, and began to concentrate on cooking tonight's dishes. After dinner, Irene continued to immerse herself in the script. Almost to the end of the candle, she put down the 3rd book and took a long breath. "How is it?" Philin couldn't help but be curious. What kind of script could make her spend so long to read? It must be known that when she was in the theater, she could read more than a dozen such thick books in half a day. "It's really hard to describe," Irene exclaimed. "Every book is full of new ideas. I've never read a story like this before." In Cinderella, the prince did not fall in love with a princess, but a beautiful commoner girl. This was not surprising, but he insisted on marrying a commoner as his wife. I even wondered, when His Royal Highness read this story, would he not be dissatisfied with its absurd and bizarre contents? Aside from that, the whole story was exciting, especially when the prince found Cinderella again and put on the crystal shoe for her. I couldn't help but want to applaud them. The Rooster Crows at Midnight is also very interesting. Compared to Cinderella, it's much simpler. I think the story can be explained in about 2 or 3 scenes. Moreover, the part where the serfs plucked up their courage to fight against the nobles is very wonderful. After a long period of foreshadowing, the serfs' emotional changes from trying to endure to the point where they could no longer bear it. The feeling of eruption when they finally decided to resist is very satisfying. The serfs fought against the nobles? Philin frowned. This was something that the nobles absolutely could not tolerate. If the serfs in the Schilt Manor dared to use hoes and shovels to fight against the head of the family, I'm afraid that the next day my father would erect their heads at the entrance of the manor. Does His Royal Highness really want you to perform this kind of play? That's because you haven't read the script. Irene gave him a blank look. After reading it, you will have the same feeling as me. Standing up and resisting was not something they could do. The small nobles simply bullied them too much. In the face of a life-threatening situation, they still just put the nobles in a cloth bag and beat them up. I think they already restrained themselves very much. Later, the nobles wanted to execute all the serfs, but a witch who was passing by saved them. She turned into the image of a well-known local nobleman and stopped the bad guys, then went to the lord's castle to plead for the serfs. After a debate, the lord made a wise and benevolent decision. He bought the serfs and promoted them to free people. I bet that by the time the play reaches this point, the audience will be cheering. But the nobles will certainly protest, Philin disapprovingly thought, and then the theater will come under pressure from the nobles, and finally the crew will be disbanded. Wait a minute, he suddenly realized that in addition to Viscount Tigu and His Royal Highness, there are no other nobles living in Border Town, and the latter is also the founder of the crew. In other words, the plays that His Royal Highness asked them to perform were really only for the general public to watch? But they can't even earn a few copper royals from their hands. According to the standard of the Long Song Stronghold Theater, this is simply a loss. Did His Royal Highness just want to entertain himself? But my dear, Irene didn't notice the change in his expression. Although the first 2 plays are wonderful enough, but compared to the third book, The Witch Diary, they are nothing. I bet that even if it was in a big city like Redwater City or King City, the theater would immediately pick out a crew, specially rehearse and publicize the story in advance. I have to say, Scroll is really a genius screenwriter. Whether it is the content of the story or the narrative technique, it is far better than any other play today. Are you sure? Philin was amused by her serious look. Even in Longsong's Stronghold, I often hear the name of Mr. Cajun Fells. His To the Rose and The Chronicles of a Prince's Search for Love are both highly acclaimed works, not only in King City, but also in other kingdoms. I heard that there are also troops from other kingdoms who come to watch and learn from it. Do you think it is better than these classic plays? Of course, you are doubting my judgment, my dear. She roughly explained the content of the play. Not to mention the plot, it is the first time I have seen such a novel narrative technique. Compared with the previous plays, which are like listening to a third person telling the story, this one firmly focuses on the three witches, and their actions have a profound impact on each other, but they themselves are unaware of it. But near the middle of the story, all the seemingly unrelated clues come together, and the three witches become an inseparable whole. I have to say, this kind of parallel development of the story will certainly cause a sensation. Of course, not in Border Town. I even doubt how many people will be able to see this level. She excitedly found a pen and paper and buried herself in writing a letter. No, I have to quickly call all the theater partners over. I really want to see their surprised faces. However, Philin stepped forward and held her hand. Wait, Irene, don't you think the content of the story is too contrary to common sense? After listening to his wife's narration, he also felt that the whole story was exciting, showing the good and evil of human nature. However, the description of the witches was completely opposite to what the church said, and it was too detailed. For example, the third lucky witch, because of the love of her family, was able to release her ability without restraint, but eventually found that the demonic bite was just a lie. Apart from being able to control magic, witches were no different from ordinary people. They could also laugh, cry, and grieve when their loved ones passed away. Isn't Prince Roland afraid that the church will come to find him if the news gets out? Contrary to common sense? No. Philin, before they became witches, they were all ordinary people, right? Well, that's right. What about me? Irene widened her eyes and said, If I become a witch, will you think I'm evil? No, of course not, Philin quickly said. You will always be the kind girl I know. Then what if we have a daughter, and she becomes a witch? Of course, that's even more impossible. He suddenly closed his mouth. In his heart he already understood what his wife meant. Judging witches from an outsider's point of view was completely different from judging one's loved ones as evil. That's right, Irene nodded with satisfaction. If we really have a witch, I will be like the father of the third witch in the story. I will take good care of her. The knight knelt down on one knee and made a vow of loyalty. This is a qualified answer. She put down the quill and chuckled. I think we can try it now. Chapter 174. 2 days after Ashes left, Maggie unexpectedly returned to Border Town and once again appeared in front of everyone. After finding out the reason, her return was warmly welcomed, and the Witch Union had a new member. What moved her greatly was that the welcome banquet was held in the castle's back garden. On a long iron shelf hung all kinds of meat, which could be taken down and roasted at will. The seasonings were also very rich, including salt, oil, chili powder, pepper, and the barbecue sauce prepared by Roland himself. It was stewed with mushrooms from the concealing forest and a whole chicken, and then mixed with salt, sugar, and wheat flour, which could make up for the regret of not having MST. Maggie almost ate until her stomach was full. In the afternoon, Roland tested her ability. According to Nightingale's judgment, her total magic capacity was at an average level among the witches, and her ability was to change into a variety of birds, provided that she had seen them before. The magic consumption was quite large, and she could continuously change 4 to 5 times a day. Maintaining the state of transformation consumed very little magic. It was a summoning ability, which was affected by the god's stone of retaliation. Her favorite bird was pigeon, but Roland noticed that no matter what kind of bird she changed into, her body would be a lot bigger. For example, a sparrow, in his opinion, was the same size as an ordinary pigeon. As for a pigeon, it was almost the size of a sea eagle. Maggie could not change into the imaginary flying beasts, such as the phoenix, griffin, and kunping that Roland had drawn, which made him feel quite regretful. In addition, Ash's plan was also worth his attention, and that was, what kind of abilities did the numerous witches that Tilly had gathered? If there were assistant witches that could greatly improve the efficiency of farming, he did not mind exchanging their skills. For this reason, Roland decided to write a long letter to Tilly, first explaining the natural alliance between the two sides, then warning her of the church's intention to unify the continent, and finally extending an olive branch, expressing his desire to cooperate and make progress together. When Maggie went to the fjords next month, he would let her take her there. The next day, the prince received another good news. The construction of the factory for the production of the steam engine was finally completed. The factory was located on the other side of the Redwater River, on the west side, next to Leaf's experimental field. The entire plot of land had been surrounded by wooden fences, and a simple road leading to the side of the pontoon bridge had been leveled. According to Roland's plan, this place would be the town's industrial park. In order to expand the building space as much as possible, the factory was built with lighter wood, covering an area of about 1,000 square meters. The machine tools made by Anna had already been transported in. There were 2 steam boring machines, 2 manual milling machines, 1 manual grinding machine, and 1 manual lathe. Although the principle of these machines was simple, the workmanship was first class. Other than the base or pedals, which were made of wood, the other parts were made of wrought iron or steel. It could be said that with the current level of materials, they had achieved the highest precision of processing. At present, there were only a pitiful dozen workers in the factory. They were originally blacksmiths and apprentices of the town's blacksmith shop, but now they were recruited by Roland with a high monthly salary of 50 silver royals to learn how to operate high-end machine tools. Their smithing tools and blacksmith shop had also been moved to a brick building outside the factory. In addition to making some unimportant parts, the production of the steam engine would all be completed by machine tools. Roland held a ribbon-cutting ceremony at the entrance of the factory. In order to strengthen the momentum, he summoned a group of officials from City Hall and gave a short speech. In the midst of Echo's simulated gun salute, the establishment of Grey Castle Industries was officially announced. In the next few days, as the head of the company, Roland would run to the factory whenever he had free time, personally demonstrating the operation of the machine tools, as well as the manufacturing process of the steam engine. In order to let the illiterate blacksmiths master how to process and assemble a steam engine, the best way he could think of was to illustrate the process, similar to the assembly manual of a model, indicating the name, number, and size of the parts one by one, and then depicting their installation order and connection method in the form of a diagram. In this regard, Soroya helped him a lot. In the first few days of production, as he had expected, almost none of the parts met the requirements, let alone putting together a complete steam engine. However, Roland did not care about the failure rate. In the hands of Anna, these defective parts could be recast into new plates in the blink of an eye. He believed that after repeated practice, these blacksmiths would master the production methods of the new era sooner or later. In addition to the industrial factory, the prince transformed the firing room of the North Slope mine, together with the backyard, into a military factory, mainly for the production of revolving rifles and bullets. After the arrival of the furnace expert, Lozia, who was recommended by Carr, in Border Town, the temperature of the new batch of blast airbags had greatly increased, and they could independently fire cement powder, so there was no longer a need for the firing room to exist. However, due to the limitations of the technology, the production of revolving rifles and bullets was still completed by Anna. Roland was designing a steam punch for stamping bullets. Although the efficiency was not as good as Anna's cutting and molding, at least it could reduce her burden. In order to thank Anna for her busy work in the past 2 weeks, he decided to give her a gift. A gift? Anna put down the cut parts in her hands, smoothed the hair that had slipped to her forehead, and showed a bright smile. Okay. Aren't you going to ask what the gift is? Roland teased her. Well, she thought for a moment, I like all the gifts you give me. After more than half a year of recuperation, there was no trace of the first time he saw Anna in the dungeon. She was thin and weak, but now she was slim and graceful. Her blue eyes were full of spirit, her plain dress looked fresh and neat, and her whole body was full of youthful vitality. This was what an 18-year-old girl should look like. Seeing the other side couldn't help but raise the corner of the mouth, Roland's mood became a lot better. The gift was placed in the castle courtyard, and in order to surprise Anna, it was also covered with a layer of linen. When he was making the messenger of ashes, he had this idea in his mind. Since he was a prince, the gift naturally had to be special, like jewelry and the like. Finished products would seem too insincere. He thought for a long time before he came up with this idea. Roland opened the linen, and a rattan basket appeared in front of the two people. The top of the basket was connected with a lot of hemp ropes, and the other end of the hemp ropes was a huge canvas. What is this? Anna walked forward and circled around it, curiously asking. A hot air balloon, he replied with a smile. It can take you up to the sky, like a bird looking down at the earth. Fly to the sky? She turned her head, her eyes flashing with excitement. Is it really possible? Soaring in the sky was the dream of mankind since ancient times. From the glider to the hot air balloon, from the airship to the airplane, people had paid huge sacrifices in the exploration and challenge, and had never given up the pursuit of this aspect. Although witches existed in this world, flying was still the right of a few people. The scenery seen from a high altitude was bound to leave a deep impression. Of course, as long as the hot air fills this airbag, it's fine. Chapter 175. The principle of the hot air balloon was very simple, and there were only two difficulties in making it. One was the combustion device, and the other was the airbag. The first point was that without a pressure vessel to provide gas fuel, relying only on firewood or charcoal to heat the air was not only inefficient, but also limited by fuel. It could not fly very far. This was also the reason why the principle of the hot air balloon was discovered very early in history, but the first to be put into use in actual combat was the hydrogen balloon. So Roland simply gave up on the combustion device, and let Anna ignite the fire to heat it. The difficulty of the airbag was its airtightness, but for Roland, who had learned from the experience of his predecessors, this problem was very easy to solve, and he just needed to use a sandwich cloth. The outer layer of the airbag was a wear-resistant canvas, the middle was lined with cow intestinal epithelium, and the inner layer was a light gauze, so that when stitched it could prevent air leakage, and at the same time, it was not afraid of the pecking of birds. Roland opened the bottom of the airbag, and let Anna spit out a black flame with a temperature close to that of an ordinary flame. The airbag slowly swelled up, looking like a wrinkled winter melon. Considering that the hot air balloon needed to carry two people, the widest part of the airbag had a diameter of 5 meters, using the intestinal epithelium of 12 cows, and the stitching process took nearly a week. If he was not the lord of a territory, he might not have been able to make such a big toy. Does it use the buoyancy provided by the hot air to fly? Anna asked. I remember it mentioned in the book that hot air always rises. That's right, hot air rises and cold air sinks. This is a common natural phenomenon. Using particle theory to explain it, the hot air ball's movement will intensify, and the ability to spread around will be stronger, and after the volume expands, the density will decrease. For the surrounding air that does not change, it is equivalent to it becoming lighter, so it will rise. After Roland finished explaining the principle, he found that except for Anna, who showed an expression of understanding, the other three were at a loss, and he could not help but secretly sigh at the importance of talent. When the airbag completely inflated and floated up, the traction rope was slowly straightened, and Roland was the first to flip into the basket, and then he took over the climbing Anna. I am still a little worried, Nightingale said uneasily. Why don't you let me go up and try it first? Believe me, nothing will happen, Roland said with a relaxed smile, and even if there is an accident, there is still lightning. I will catch them, don't worry. Lightning patted her chest. And me. Maggie imitated lightning and patted her chest. With a shake, The hot air balloon pulled the basket off the ground and gradually climbed. Not long after, the two of them crossed the top of the castle, and the whole town appeared in front of them. To Roland, such a scene was not unfamiliar to him. After all, he was also someone who had seen skyscrapers. However, in Anna's eyes, it was a brand new experience that was completely different from her previous perspective. She leaned against the side of the basket and looked out. She grabbed Roland's arm tightly with one hand, looking excited and nervous at the same time. This was the first time that Roland had seen such an expression on her face. Perhaps people whose feet had never left the ground would have a slight fear of heights when they first flew into the sky. This was the first time that Roland had seen her show such an expression. She was probably a person whose feet had never left the ground. The rope was about 50 meters long, which was the height of a 15-story building in the future. Roland told Anna to reduce the firepower, and the hot air balloon finally hovered in the air. At the beginning, Lightning stayed close to the basket, but when she saw that the basket was stable, she felt relieved and began to play a game of tag with Maggie around the hot air balloon. Looking down from here, they could clearly see the roof of the castle, the town under construction, the Redwater River flowing from west to east, and the green farmlands along the river. "How do you feel?" Until Anna retracted her head, Roland asked with a smile. "Thank you for your gift," she said excitedly. "I didn't know that I could fly so high." "You can go even higher." Roland sat down against the side wall of the rattan basket. If the rope was longer, it would be no problem to fly 10 times the distance. But the higher you go, the more complex the airflow will be, and it will be difficult to guarantee your safety. Moreover, this is only a primary aircraft. Later, when the piston machine is built, ordinary people will be able to fly faster and higher than birds, and then... He looked up at the blue sky. People will even be able to fly out of this world and go to the boundless space. Anna held her breath. Her eyes shone brightly as if something was about to come out of her mouth. "I can't guarantee that we will be able to fly out of this world." Roland was amused by her appearance. "But if we can build a piston machine so that ordinary people can fly like birds, it should be possible in my lifetime." In fact, with Anna, there was no bottleneck in the processing ability. The current shortcoming was the performance of the materials. Inferior pig iron could be used to make a steam engine, wrought iron could be used to make cannons, and steel smelted from the black fire could also be used to make a revolving gun. But if it was an internal combustion engine, it would probably need high-quality cast iron, cast steel, or aluminum. "The reason why Border Town can have its current appearance is all thanks to you, Miss Anna." After hearing this sentence, Anna was stunned. After a while, she sat down and softly said, "My mother died in a fire, but I not only didn't die in the smoke and fire, but also became a witch. For a long time, I thought that my awakening had caused the fire, and I was extremely disgusted with myself as a witch. When I was locked in prison, I thought that I might be able to usher in freedom, but you rescued me from the prison and taught me how to use my ability. I didn't expect that in addition to burning and pain, flames could also have so many uses." Anna paused. "Being able to meet you, I should feel extremely satisfied, but now I find that my thinking has changed. Sometimes I feel suffocated and uncomfortable, and I hope to get more." She climbed onto Roland's shoulder. "Even so, do you still want to hire me?" Her lake blue eyes sparkled, and her breath blew on his face, making him feel a little ticklish. Separated by thin clothes, he could feel her soft body and her thumping heartbeat. Even so, she didn't avoid his eyes. When there was no nightingale, she was always full of enthusiasm and initiative. "There is..." Before Roland could finish his words, Anna had already sealed his lips. After separating, he gently gasped, "I want to hire you always. Miss Anna." This time, he took the initiative to lower his head and pressed his body against hers. "Hey, wait." Maggie chased after Lightning for a while, suddenly stopped in the air, and looked at the empty basket. "They're gone, coo." Lightning tilted her head and glanced at them. They just sat down. "Won't you not be able to see the scenery outside?" "The scenery can be seen at any time, but there are not many opportunities like this." "Opportunities?" Maggie shook her wings and landed on Lightning's shoulder. "I don't quite understand, coo. Do you want to go see them, Coo? No way, Lightning hugged the pigeon. This is a sacred ceremony, it can't be interrupted. Chapter 176. After staying in the air for half an hour, the hot air balloon slowly landed in the castle courtyard. As soon as the basket landed, the witches who were attracted by the hot air balloon began to gather around. Compared to the beginning when only Nightingale was present, now the members of the Witch Union were basically all present. Scroll, who had just returned from the city hall, had even trotted all the way here. After asking about the situation, she had been anxiously looking at the sky, fearing that this huge ball would fall. As soon as His Royal Highness climbed out of the basket, Scroll and Vendi immediately went up to preach to him, advising him not to put himself in danger. After the prince defended himself with a few words, he wisely used this novelty to change the topic. Nightingale thought it was a bit funny, but when she was about to greet him, her heart suddenly froze and she stopped in place. She saw His Royal Highness Roland carry Anna out of the basket, her eyes overflowing with a smile, her cheeks tinged with a touch of red. Her flaxen bangs were neatly parted to one side, and her hair was hung with a small clip, shining with a silver light. Nightingale remembered a few days ago when he was instructing the blacksmiths how to operate the large machines in the factory, he had casually ground a piece of silver ingot. Was that a hair clip personally made by His Royal Highness? The other witches also clamored to ride the hot air balloon, and soon, the air balloon inflated again. This time Anna and Nana were the ones who took off. Nightingale stood outside the crowd, watching the hot air balloon getting smaller and smaller. Her mind was filled with Anna's tender smile. Anna, who usually had a very calm and indifferent face, rarely showed such an expression. Nightingale had seen many similar expressions on the streets and alleys of the big cities during her wandering journey with the Witch Cooperation Association, so she knew what it meant. Obviously, His Royal Highness and Anna were not simply watching the scenery from above. Although Lightning and Maggie were there, it was impossible for them to do that, but once this idea emerged, it was difficult to suppress. She suddenly felt as if her heart was empty. Although she had already made a decision, when faced with this moment, Nightingale found that she was far less indifferent than she had imagined. She walked to a corner and sat down against the wall. Her mind went blank as she watched everyone making a ruckus. The hot air balloon descended again, and after Nana climbed out of the basket, Leaf, who had seized the opportunity, immediately sat inside. When Nightingale came back to her senses, Roland was no longer in the courtyard. After being lectured by Scroll, he returned to the castle to busy himself with his work. She was supposed to follow him to his office and stay by his side, just as she had done in the past. However, when Nightingale stood up, she found that she could not take a step forward. She really did not know what kind of expression she should use to face Roland. Even if he could not see her after entering the mist, Nightingale still knew that his happy expression would make her feel even worse. Just like that, the hot air balloon went up and down. After everyone had sat on it once, Vendi walked over. "Why are you still here? Don't you want to try it?" The feeling of looking down at the town from the sky is amazing. If there was anyone who was more difficult to face than His Royal Highness Roland, it would be Anna. Nightingale stood up in a panic. "No, I have to go back to my office." After saying that, she entered the mist. After walking 2 steps, she realized why she had to use her ability in the courtyard. She looked back at Vendi, who was looking around with a puzzled expression. Gritting her teeth, she quickly left. After dinner, she went back to the bedroom and threw herself on the bed. Today, until the end, she had not shown herself in the office. When His Royal Highness tentatively called out her name, she only used her hand to point at his back twice, indicating that she was here. Even when the other side took out the salt-baked dried fish from the mahogany table, which usually made her salivate, she did not compromise. "What's wrong? Did something happen today?" Vendi walked into the bedroom and closed the door. "I saw that while everyone was riding the hot air balloon, you were sitting alone on the side." "It's nothing." Nightingale turned over. Obviously there is something. Vendi sat on the edge of the bed, turned her body, and stared at her for a while. "I thought you were willing to tell me everything." The latter closed her eyes, and after a long time, she murmured, "It's because of Anna." Anna? Nightingale didn't want to say these annoying things, because it would only make her feel narrow-minded. After all, the first witch that His Royal Highness knew was Anna, not her. But if she didn't say it, her heart would feel like it was blocked by something, making her even more uncomfortable. In the Witch Cooperation Association, Vendi had helped her a lot. Whenever she was confused, the first person she thought of was always Vendi, and the other had never disappointed her. Thinking of this, she gently held Vendi's hand and roughly explained the matter. After listening to her, Vendi sighed, "Anna doesn't understand the importance of this matter. Do you also not understand? Last time I reminded you, it is impossible for him to be together with a witch. Roland Wimbledon is the king. He needs an heir to inherit the kingdom. From this point, he will never choose a witch as his wife." "He will." "What?" Vendi was startled. "His Royal Highness Roland will marry a witch." Nightingale suddenly opened her eyes and said word by word, "He said it himself." She wanted to hide this information in the bottom of her heart, but now she couldn't bear the feeling of not being understood. Vendi seemed to be scared. After a long time she frowned and asked, "Are you sure?" "It's true," Nightingale repeated Scroll's question from the other day. When he was asked if it was possible for you to marry a witch, his answer was, "Why not? You know my ability, I can tell whether a person is lying or not." When he said this, he was serious. Vendi suddenly grabbed Nightingale's arm. "You remember, don't tell this to anyone, not even the Sisters of the Witch Union." "But because he is destined to become the king of Grey Castle, what does it mean to be a king without descendants? Even if there is no church, it will be difficult for the local nobles to support such a person to become their king. So this matter must be kept a secret, absolutely can't be told. What you need to do now is to protect his safety. Don't forget, whether he can become the ruler of Grey Castle or not, is related to the fate of all sisters." Nightingale nodded. "As for the matter that is bothering you," Vendi thought for a moment, "do you want to ascend the Queen's throne, or do you just want to stay by His Royal Highness' side?" "Of course I want to stay by his side," Nightingale said without hesitation. "Then aren't you by his side now?" Vendi smiled. "There is indeed only one queen, but even if he ascends the throne, he will still need your protection. Do you understand what I mean?" Nightingale blinked her eyes and didn't answer. "So it's not difficult to be together. The difficult part is to accept the choice you have made." Vendi spread out her hands. "If you can't do it, you can only retreat or go further. As for this question, only you know the answer." Chapter 177. Hermes Cathedral Chamber. The position of Pope was still vacant. The three bishops sat side by side, and it was still Maine who spoke first. "I heard that there was some unrest in the kingdom of Everwinter. The Judgment Army station there is already dealing with this matter. The one leading them is High Priest Cabourn," Tayfun replied. "What's the reason? Isn't it because of those dregs who were drawn into the church?" Heather whistled. "After the Queen was beheaded, those nobles joined the church one after another, and became the church's upper echelons. It was all because of your compromise plan, Sir Maine. Under the guise of arresting witches, they wantonly plundered the city, and the city guards also turned a blind eye to it. The people couldn't accept it, so it naturally caused a backlash." "This is not my plan, Madam Heather," Maine said in a displeased tone. "This is the will of His Holiness the Pope. This way, we can use the shortest amount of time to obtain everything in the kingdom, and not continue to compete with the nobles. There is no lack of outstanding talents among them, and if we can rope them in, it will be of great help to us. As for those parasites, they don't have the privilege of being inherited by the bloodline and will be eliminated in just one generation." "Well, since you've even mentioned His Holiness the Pope, I won't say anything more." Heather shrugged her shoulders. "But those who have ruined the church's reputation must be handed over to me." Maine looked at Bishop Tayfun, who pondered and said, "I suggest not dealing with them for the time being. After suppressing the unrest, we can put the nobles under house arrest. After all, they've just joined the church. If we attack them now, it might cause general unrest among the nobles." "But Heather pounded the table and said, "The rules of the church must not be violated. Any robbery carried out in the name of the church is a felony, and I am the one in charge of the law and arbitration." At times like this, we have to look at the bigger picture. I'm talking about the big picture. Heather directly interrupted Tayfun's words. "Don't forget what we relied on to establish an image of justice and fairness throughout the kingdom of endless winter. If we don't strike a severe blow at this time, the people of the kingdom of endless winter will lose confidence in us. This was the foundation of the church, not those damned nobles. If you don't agree, I will ask His Holiness the Pope directly." The Pope did not have time to worry about such things. The foundation of the church was not in the people, but in how powerful they were. Maine sighed and gestured for Tayfun to calm down. "Then let High Priest Cabourn escort them back to the new holy city for trial?" "No, I'll go there myself," Heather said. "I've been busy recently, and I expect to be back in about 2 or 3 months. For a trial, the more people who see it, the better." The Eternal Winter Royal Capital's ice platform seems to be a good place. "Are you sure?" Maine frowned. "There aren't any extra commanders to protect you in the kingdom of Everwinter. You'll be in danger if you encounter an extraordinary." "How could there be so many extraordinary witches?" Heather said disapprovingly. "Just give me a team of judges, that's enough." "If you insist." Maine didn't want to dwell on this topic anymore. "I have bad news here. When the church's army attacked the Broken Tooth Castle in the kingdom of Wolfshart, they encountered an accident and lost more than 20 God's Punishment Army soldiers and more than 100 Judgment Army soldiers. Until now, the Broken Tooth Castle still hasn't been captured. More than 20 God's Punishment Army soldiers." Tayfun stared. "Who's the commander?" "Belle, she's already dead." "The commander died in battle?" "It seems that they really encountered a terrible challenge," Heather said with great interest. "Losing so many God's Punishment Army soldiers, it seems that Lord Wren will have a headache." "You can't blame him. The terrain of the Broken Tooth Castle is special. The city gate was opened in the middle of the mountain, and it was about 3 feet, about 10 meters, high. They also destroyed the wooden bridge to enter the gate, and even used some of the alchemist's gadgets." Maine explained, "According to the report, after they set up the wooden ladder, the God's Punishment Army soldiers had just climbed up when they were attacked by a strange flame. First, a large pile of white solid was ejected from the pipe above the city gate, and then it started to smoke and catch fire. The flames stuck to their bodies, and they couldn't get rid of it until it burned them. Now they are contacting the church's believers in the city to see if they can attack from both inside and outside." "I dare say that the church in the city has certainly been bathed in blood." Heather curled her lips. "If they want to attack, they should send more people to fill it up. The alchemist's gadgets have never been able to be produced in large quantities. They will be used up after filling it up." "That's the God's Punishment Army." Tayfun was so angry that his beard trembled. "Do you know how difficult it is to transform a God's Punishment Army? Now there are less than 1,000 people. If we lose more than half of the God's Punishment Army in order to unify the continent, how will we resist the months of the demons? Not to mention the devils afterwards." "Don't argue," Maine said aloud. "I told you this news, not to let you argue about the means of attack. The church currently needs more God's Punishment Army, and now that the kingdom of eternal winter is under the control of the church, some things can be done more justifiably. In the past, the seeds were sent twice a year, but now, I want to add one more time. Spring has been affected by the months of demons, so the length of the season is not consistent. So from summer onwards, a batch of seeds must be sent to the holy city every quarter, and the transformation ceremony will be held accordingly. This matter will be handed over to you, Lord Tayfun. But there aren't that many orphans and babies that can be taken in." The old bishop stroked his beard. "Not everyone will send their abandoned children to the church. So you want to find a way to fight for it. The kingdom of eternal winter is already the church's longest established kingdom, and it has the most believers. If even this land can't provide enough manpower, the other 3 kingdoms will only be slower to digest. Don't forget, in the process of unifying the continent, the turmoil will have to be quelled by the army of judges and the God's Punishment Army. It's not that there aren't any people, Heather curled up the corner of her mouth. There are as many stray children on the street as there are stray cats and dogs. I heard that there are also black street rats who specially recruit these children to join them, training them to become pickpockets, informants, smugglers, or scapegoats. Before the nobility was eliminated, they could still carry the rats to shelter them from the wind and rain, but now, thanks to Lord Maine, they have all become part of the church. If the sewers have no cover, where can the rats hide? If you send out the army of judges to catch all the underground forces in one fell swoop, I think you can harvest a lot of children, while at the same time cleaning up the dregs will leave a good impression on the people, and will also deter those nobles who are ready to make trouble. It's like killing 3 birds with 1 stone, isn't it? It's indeed a good method, Maine thought. No matter how extreme her temperament is, when faced with a problem, she can always come up with a solution quickly, except for some words that must be deliberately ignored. Let's implement this method. In short, before the fall, we must occupy the entire territory of the Wolfshark Kingdom, except for the army of judges who are stationed to maintain order. All the other troops must be transferred back to Hermes to defend against this year's months of demons. This time, the enemy will only be stronger. Although Tayfun was reluctant, he finally nodded. When the time comes, the nobles whose interests have been damaged will jump out to protest. Don't blame me for not reminding you. In addition, the Rose Kingdom has already noticed the movements of the neighboring countries. Many of the nobles in the cities are targeting the church, and in some places there have been incidents of looting and burning of churches. I suggest that we organize a temporary evacuation of the believers. There is no need to waste them in this kind of conflict. No, they must resist to the end, Maine rejected. The more the believers are sacrificed, the more reason we will have to retaliate. This is not a waste, but a spark to ignite the fire. For the church, there are not many believers, and the foundation of the kingdom is not deep, so retreating will only make the church weaker. Well, I was just mentioning it, that's all. Tayfun spread out his hands. Finally, there's the kingdom of Grey Castle. Well, you see for yourselves. He took out a roll of paper from his sleeve and threw it in front of Maine. Maine opened it and glanced at it. This letter was actually written by the Queen of Clearwater, Garcia Wimbledon. Soon, his eyebrows wrinkled. She actually hanged Priest Decca? She also fed all the believers to the fish, Tayfun added. The church was also demolished to the ground. She should have discovered the side effects of the pill. Heather smacked her lips. I already told you, even if you continue to replenish that thing, the effect will become weaker and weaker, until finally it will die. Using this kind of thing to destroy the enemy's army is a good thing, but once the effect appears, the other side will also know what the church is planning. But the troublesome thing is, I remember that the previous intelligence report mentioned that not many of her subordinates took the pill, right? Instead, a lot of them were eaten by the southern barbarians. No more than 1,000, she said that this account is on our heads. Maine put down the letter. It's simply ridiculous. Without the support of the church, how could she become the Queen of Clearwater? Where is Timothy Wimbledon? After receiving our pills, why hasn't he attacked the southern territory yet? Chapter 178. Genius 1 second. Remember Love Yogo? Talk Net, providing you with wonderful novels to read. Haha. Heather laughed out loud. It's impossible to expect a chess piece to completely obey orders, as long as it maintains the same goal as us. Love Go Little, Talk Net can no matter where he attacks, as long as he continues to consume the soldiers. In any case, Grey Castle is the last kingdom to be attacked, so there is still time for them to fight. Didn't Roland Wimbledon refuse our pills last time? We can let Timothy put more pressure on the Western Territory. Maybe he will accept it. That being said, the Queen of Clearwater's open hostility still made Maine somewhat unhappy. After all, this chess piece was personally chosen by him. If Timothy occupied the other territories of Grey Castle and still didn't fight with Garcia, but instead stationed his troops to maintain a stalemate, the fight for the throne would not be able to achieve the desired effect. It seems that some other means will have to be taken. Regarding the Western Territory, let's wait for the news from the diplomatic mission before making a decision, he said. That's all for today. Please act according to the plan. I still have to go to Hermes. Ah, That's right, Heather suddenly realized. Today is the transformation day, right? How many people have applied to participate in the transformation ceremony? This is the secret of the mechanism. Maine stood up and, without looking back, walked out of the secret room. After going down the long suspended stairs to the bottom of the cave, the archbishop stepped over the mirror-like smooth white grinding stone and walked towards the depths of the mechanism. Different from the usual quiet, today the mechanism was quite lively. A group of approved judges were standing outside waiting, most of them entering this place for the first time, so they were curiously looking around. Seeing Maine, all of them straightened their chests, clenched their fists and saluted, "Your Excellency." He smiled and nodded in return. These judges were the church's elite warriors, pious to God and willing to sacrifice themselves. The God's Punishment Army's transformation ceremony was not guaranteed to be successful. They had already understood this before submitting the application, but even so, they were still willing to sacrifice their lives for this great honor. Under the reverent eyes of the warriors, he passed through the third checkpoint and arrived in front of the pivotal secret area. The Pope's guards were already waiting here. They bowed and pushed open the metal door behind them. Maine followed the guard into the room. From here onwards, it was the heart of the Hermes mechanism. All of the church's research and inventions were carried out here. There were no torches in the pivotal secret area. His vision suddenly turned dark. After a while, a long and narrow passage appeared in front of him. The walls and ceiling of the passage were cast from iron, and both sides were inlaid with fluorescent stones. This strange stone was a kind of God's stone of retaliation. After being stained with demonic beast blood, it would emit a green fluorescent light. At the end of the passageway was a cage. Walking into the cage, the guard pulled the trigger, and the chain above his head creaked, sounding especially ear-piercing in the quiet passage. Accompanied by this sound, the cage slowly sank into the hole in the ground. Then, Maine's eyes suddenly opened up. An extremely spacious underground space appeared in front of him. Love, go, small, netka. Such a shocking scene, no matter how many times he saw it, would always give him a feeling of insignificance. According to common sense, the cave buried underground should be dark, so dark that he couldn't even see his fingers in front of him. But here, the whole cave was illuminated by the light of the God's Stone of Retaliation. The huge God's Stone of Retaliation looked like countless prisms rising from the ground, forming clusters of crystal flowers. The smallest prism was as thick as a person's body, and the biggest one was so big that it would take more than 10 people to encircle it. The height was uneven, and the tallest one almost reached the top of the cave, even higher than the Tower of Heaven of the Hermes Cathedral. Their colors were also different. The densest cluster of God's Stone of Retaliation was lavender, while the clusters on the side were from dark blue to light green, and the smaller ones were white. There were also some prisms that had just emerged from the ground, almost transparent. The luster of the purple God's Stone of Retaliation was the most conspicuous, especially the one that surpassed the Tower of Heaven. Its brightness was close to that of the full moon, so that the bottom of the cave could be faintly seen without the help of a torch. Under the influence of such a dense and huge number of God's Stone of Retaliation, the inside of the mountain was in an area where magic could not operate. Moreover, all the God's Stone of Retaliation sold by the church were mined from here. The space of the cave was enough to accommodate 5 or 6 Hermes Cathedral, and they had indeed built a building here that was exactly the same as the cathedral, and named it the Pivotal Secret Temple. However, compared to the cathedral on the top of the mountain, this one looked much older. From midair, Maine could see that there was a black iron gate on the mountain wall behind the temple, which was the entrance to the foot of the Hermes mountain, which was connected to the old holy city. Therefore, in a sense, this ancient building was the main body of the mechanism. It had existed here long before the establishment of the new holy city. It took no less than half a quarter of an hour for the cage to reach the ground. Maine walked out of the cage, tidied up his robe, and followed the messenger to the temple. The transformation ceremony was held in the hall on the first floor. After entering the hall, the bishop felt that the surroundings had been restored to the light. It was no longer the cold blue and purple light, but the orange light of thousands of burning candles. Above his head was a three-tiered tower-style chandelier, and there were also many candlesticks placed around the hall. In the blink of an eye, it looked like countless stars were swaying. Thanks to the open flame, the chill in the cave had been dispelled a lot. The man standing in the middle of the two transformation tables was the highest leader of the church, Pope O'Brien. He wore a striking red robe with gold trimmings, and a glittering jewel crown on his head. He was carefully inspecting the transformation equipment, making the final preparations for the ceremony. "Your Holiness." He went forward and knelt in front of O'Brien, kissing his fingers. "Rise, child." The Pope's voice was hoarse and slow. "There's no one here other than the guards, so there's no need to pay attention to the complicated etiquette." Maine stood up and could not help but be startled. His Holiness looked much older than the last time he saw him. His face was covered with deep wrinkles, and his skin was an unhealthy white, loose and dull. The densely packed brown spots were extremely eye-catching. The bishop's eyes became hot. "You have worked hard." "This is the trace of time," O'Brien said calmly. "No one can fight against time. I don't have much life left, and I'm afraid I won't see the day when humans defeat the demons, so I don't have to bear the unknown pain. But you still have to continue fighting until you finally defeat the enemy, or be defeated by them. And if we fail again, we will be completely destroyed." Maine nodded. "I will do my duty until the last moment." "Very good." The old man smiled. "You've done very well recently. You've increased the number of Judgment Army soldiers for the church by more than 1,000. This time, there are also 62 applications for transformation, which is already the highest number in years. Your Holiness, can you tell me how many God's Punishment Army soldiers we need to defeat the demons?" Maine hesitated for a moment before asking. "All the information I know about the demons comes from the Holy Book. But the records in the Holy Book are not complete. There's no record of their origin, number, or fighting methods. I know that I'll only be qualified to know these secrets after I become the Pope, but—" "Oh," O'Brien reached out his hand to stop him. "You're too anxious, child. You have to be patient. It won't be long before you take over this crown and become the next Pope. At that time, all your questions will be answered in the library at the top of the pivotal secret temple. Now, I can only tell you that the more, the better." He took a breath. "In addition, although I didn't ask you to come for the transformation ceremony, since we've met, you'll try to preside over this year's transformation. With me watching, it can also be considered as accumulating some, experience in the future." Maine quickly patted the Pope's back. When the Pope's breathing became a little smoother, he bowed his head and said, "Yes, Your Holiness. If you like this work, you're welcome to vote on it. Your support is my greatest motivation. For mobile users, please read it here." Chapter 179. The God's Punishment Army's transformation ceremony was something that the Pope had to master. A year ago, when Maine received the God's Punishment Army's ancient book from His Majesty O'Brien, it was equivalent to obtaining the right to inherit the position of the next Pope. Maine had already memorized the contents of the book by heart. A God's Punishment Army needed to sacrifice a witch's life, fusing her blood with the God's Stone of Retaliation, and then injecting it into the body of a judge. This ceremony had been improved several times over the past hundreds of years, but the essence remained the same. The witches determined the upper limit of the number of God's Punishment Army, and the will of the judges was the key to the success rate of the transformation. After reading this ancient book, he finally understood why the church took in so many underage women every year. The witches appeared without any warning, and before the magic gathered, they were no different from ordinary people. But once the magic began to gather, their bodies, organs, and blood would all be changed. Therefore, in addition to expanding the scale of breeding, there was no other way. This was also the reason why he agreed with Heather's statement. Everything they had done could already be regarded as extremely evil. Every high-ranking member's hands were stained with blood, and they had slaughtered more witches than any executioner. But in order to defeat the devil, in order to avoid the destruction of mankind, they had to do this. Only the winner was qualified to receive God's favor. Two judges were lying on the transformation table. Maine recognized them. They were Darian from the advance camp and Tucker Thor from the Holy City Guard. The latter was also a presiding judge. Although both of them were smiling, the bishop could still see the tension in their muscles and clenched fists. He patted their shoulders. "Relax, I believe you can do it. My lord, when the time comes, we only need to endure the pain?" Darian couldn't help but ask. "That's right, we just need to endure it," Maine said with a smile. "You're Darian, right? You still remember my name," he said excitedly. "Of course, you're a member of the advance camp and participated in the defense of Hermes last year. The captain's? Alicia, am I right?" Yes, Darn nodded repeatedly. "Our team suffered heavy casualties in a battle. Half of our team members died at the hands of demonic hybrids. At that time I thought, if only I had the ability to kill all those deformed hybrids. So, Your Excellency, I want to join the God's Punishment Army." "It's good to become stronger to protect your comrades," Maine encouraged. He then looked at the presiding judge. "What about you? Why did Tucker Thor decide to join the God's Punishment Army?" "In order to protect the new holy city, Your Excellency," he said firmly. "The priest said that every year from now on, the demonic beasts will become stronger and stronger. Last time, they had already touched the walls of the holy city. If it weren't for the God's Punishment Army, the cathedral might have been destroyed. I also want to be a strong shield against the demonic beasts and a spear that can pierce through the enemy." "Very good. Both of you are the pride of the church." Maine followed the instructions in the ancient book and used conversation to dispel their nervousness and fear. Seeing that the two of them were getting more and more excited, he waved his hand and signaled for the ceremony to continue. The guard came forward and blindfolded the two of them, then used bracelets and ankles to firmly fasten their limbs to the conversion platform. Then the witch was carried in and placed between the two of them. As a witch raised by the church, she had spent most of her life in the monastery of the Old Holy City. After her awakening, she would be sent to the pivotal secret area to wait for the conversion. The day before the sacrifice, she had been given a large amount of dreamland water, an herb made from sleeping fern and winter flowers, to ensure that any noise during the ceremony would not wake her up. Age? Number 1, 18 years old, the guard replied. This was a routine inquiry. Only the blood of an adult, which was enough to meet the requirements for the conversion of 2 God's Punishment Army members at the same time. Maine checked the list of witches again and announced the start of the ceremony. A delicate silver needle was inserted into the witch's arm. Red-brown blood flowed down the tube wrapped around the needle and gathered in the crystal basin under her body. The bottom of the basin was covered with a layer of light blue God's stone of retaliation. The blood gradually soaked the stone and finally filled the whole basin. Soon, the God's stone of retaliation changed. Through the side of the basin, it could be seen that the blue stone was absorbing the blood. After about a quarter of an hour, the stone gradually melted and disappeared. The turbid blood became clear and the color changed from reddish-brown to sky blue. These operations seemed simple, but after tens of thousands of experiments, a complete and reliable set of steps was obtained. For example, the estimation of the witch's blood according to her age and body shape, the production of the silver needle and the tube, which part of the body to insert the silver needle and which part to insert the blood, as well as the quality and quantity of the God's stone of retaliation used, and so on. The ancient book recorded in detail the previous failed experiments and improvements, and also explained the general principle of the conversion. After the witch's body was transformed by magic, her blood had the ability to strengthen the organs and tendons. If it was used directly, it would only kill the recipient in an instant. It was necessary to soak the God's stone of retaliation in the witch's blood and dissolve the unknown power within it. Only then could it be injected into the body of the transformed person. Even so, this kind of blood would damage the person's mind, causing them to gradually lose emotion and intelligence, and eventually leaving only instincts and a strong will. The strength of the surviving God's Punishment Army was equivalent to that of an extraordinary. Moreover, even if they didn't wear the God's Stone of Retaliation, they would still have the anti-magic effect. It had to be said that this was a wonderful combination. The witch's blood could kill humans, and swallowing the god's stone of retaliation could also put people to death. But when the two were combined, they could instead minimize the adverse effects. When the blue liquid slowly flowed along the tube into the bodies of the two judges, the blue veins on their arms and necks suddenly bulged. Their expressions became grim, as if they were enduring great pain. Darn was the first to shout. He struggled on the stage, his 5 fingers clenched and then opened, but his hands and feet were unable to move. Soon, his whole body was covered with a layer of sweat. Tucker wasn't any better. He issued a series of low growls, a trace of blood flowed from the corner of his mouth, and his whole body twitched. The level of the liquid in the crystal basin slowly decreased, and when it was about to reach the bottom, Darion's voice turned into a sobbing voice. He randomly shouted some unclear words, his skin burst open and dissolved, and his whole body emitted white smoke. According to the description in the ancient book, his transformation was basically on the verge of failure. When Maine was hesitating whether he should continue to observe, the Pope pressed his shoulder from behind. "Enough, let him be free." A guard came forward, pulled out a dagger, and neatly pierced Darion's neck. Then he suddenly twisted the hilt, ending his pain. After an unbearable wait, Tucker Thor's twitching subsided, his breathing gradually stabilized, and his skin changed from red to light blue. Maine knew that he had survived the transformation ceremony. One person succeeded, one person failed. Such a result made the Lord sigh. In a short period of half an hour, the church had lost a devout judge, and at the same time wasted half of the witch's blood. However, there were still 60 judges waiting to be transformed, so he must let the ceremony continue. When the ceremony was completed, Maine could hardly stand. He staggered down the stage and almost lost his manners. He sat against the wall of the hall. The Pope slowly walked over and stood in front of him. "To tell you the truth, your performance surprised me, child. The first time I presided over the ceremony, it was much worse than you." That year, I was 45 years old, and the strong smell of blood made me vomit directly on the ceremony stage. I almost wasted a whole basin of blood. The former pope even severely beat me, but after the beating, he ordered me to return to the stage and continue to preside over the ceremony. Maine opened his mouth, but did not know what to say. "So, don't think about anything, go back and rest for a day." "Yes, Your Holiness." The bishop took a deep breath, and when he was ready to leave, he suddenly remembered the purpose of his visit. "By the way, you asked me to come to the pivotal secret area for—" "Oh, look at my memory." "Oh," Brian shook his head. "I asked you to come to give you a new poison developed by the agency." "Poison?" In the pivotal secret area, there was an institution that specialized in the research of God's stone of retaliation, such as cold-expelling pills, fluorescent stones, berserker drugs, and so on. Once there were results, they would be distributed to the bishop. But he had never heard that they were also involved in poisons. In Maine's impression, this should be the expertise of the alchemists. According to them, this result was completely accidental. The Pope slowly said, "As long as it is sprinkled on a rotten corpse, it will have a long-term effect on the surrounding people, unlike ordinary poisons that must be poured into the mouth. Without a special antidote, there is basically no cure. You can ask Master Crow's Eye about the specific situation. I think it may come in handy in the battle against the Four Kingdoms." Chapter 180. Recently, Roland was immersed in a happy mood. Even when sitting alone in the office, he would occasionally hum 1 or 2 songs, while recalling the good times in the hot air balloon basket. The appearance of Anna closing her eyes and asking for a kiss was too cute. Just thinking about it made him unable to help but raise the corner of his mouth. And the most important thing was the meaning of her words, which had undoubtedly revealed her fiery feelings. The only thing he could do at that time was to respond to her more enthusiastically. So much so that when he landed, Roland felt a faint pain in his lips. Maybe it was because the kiss was too long that she couldn't breathe properly, and when she panicked, she used her teeth? In any case, he hadn't experienced this feeling for a long time. When he was close to a quarter of his life, the skills he had learned from TV, movies, novels, and comics could finally be put to use. Moreover, The target was such a beautiful and moving Miss Anna. Roland felt that he had finally taken the first step towards becoming a winner in life. Satisfied, he took a deep breath and put his hand into the drawer, wanting to chew some snacks to calm his joy, but the result was that he felt empty air. The beef jerky was obviously put in yesterday. Roland looked back at Nightingale, who was lying by the window. The latter whistled and pretended to casually look at the scenery. He had deliberately replaced the fish jerky with beef jerky in order to prevent Nightingale from stealing it, but he didn't expect that she would also accept the beef jerky. At this moment, footsteps came from outside the door. "Your Royal Highness, Sir Barav is asking for an audience." "Let him in." Nightingale didn't hide her figure like before, but pulled down her hood, returned to the recliner by the wall and sat down. The assistant minister pushed the door and saw that there were other people in the office. He was a little surprised, but soon returned to normal. "Your Royal Highness, this month's population statistics have been done." He handed over a roll of parchment. "So fast?" "With the registration file, it is now much more convenient to count," the assistant minister said with a smile. "Your previous decision was really a wise move." "Well, now they're starting to flatter me." Roland unrolled the paper roll and saw that according to the different occupations of the people in Border Town, the number of tools was arranged according to their categories. It was clear at a glance. Compared to the reports that didn't even have paragraphs when he first transmigrated, Barav's ability had indeed improved significantly. The first row was also the largest group, the serfs, currently totaling 3,628 people, including their families. There was also a note at the bottom, 1,500 serfs engaged in farming. "Your Highness, aren't there too few farmers?" Barav pointed to the first line and said, "According to Sirius Eli's estimate from the Ministry of Agriculture, if we want Border Town to stop importing food, I'm afraid we'll have to double the amount of farmland and manpower in order to meet Border Town's food needs." Roland had some impression of the name Sirius. He should be a knight of the Charging Wolf family. The 1,500 people engaged in farming were the first batch of serfs, and the subsequent batches were all transferred by Roland to the mines or cars construction team. They had also received the same guarantee: as long as they worked for a long time, they would be promoted to free people. "I don't intend to be self-sufficient in food this year. There is still a lot of wheat stored in the castle warehouse, enough for 2 or 3 months of consumption. Moreover, the newly planted wheat this year is also different." "Different?" Barav was startled. "Well, you'll know when the time comes," Roland smiled. "That was Leaf's improved golden ones. The yield per plant was at least 3 times higher than ordinary wheat, and when the harvest came, it would definitely surprise everyone." This was also the reason why he didn't want to invest too much of the population in agriculture. With Leaf's magical crops, in the future, only a small number of farmers would be needed to feed the majority of the people, thus saving precious human resources and investing them in industrial development and urban construction. He continued to look down. The second line of the parchment was the construction personnel. The following remarks were very complicated. There were stonemasons, bricklayers, clay craftsmen, carpenters, handymen, and so on. The total number was more than 1,100 people, most of which were serfs working as handymen. It was precisely because of this new force that Border Town was able to quickly build a batch of residential areas and factories. Building templates, batches, and procedures were an important means of speeding up the construction progress. Although in Roland's eyes, this speed was still not enough, for the locals, it was already considered shocking. The third line was the mining personnel. Very similar to the construction industry above, the number of local residents in Border Town had dropped to 25, mainly responsible for steam engine operation, mine registration, and management work. The remaining 1,600 people were outsiders, including the captured mercenaries in the Battle of Long Song Stronghold and the serfs who were sent later. "Recently there have been several fights in the mining area," Barav said, "mainly between the mercenaries and the serfs. This is a hidden danger, Your Highness. They are too many. Once a fight breaks out, it will be impossible to rely on the 25 managers to control it. I suggest that the First Army be responsible for helping guard." "Well," Roland thought for a moment, "let's do it this way. Now there is a lack of manpower, there is no way to form a police force. I will talk to Iron Axe. A team of about 50 people should be enough. Police, what is that? You can think of it as a patrol team, but the scope of jurisdiction is much larger. Basically, the internal security is completed by them. In this era, there was no distinction between internal violence and external violence, so letting the army take care of public security would not become a dark history. Before dealing with the huge enemy of the church, he did not intend to disperse manpower to form a second set of violent machines. Ranked 4th was the 1st Army of Border Town. After the end of the Battle of Longsong Stronghold, the 1st Army's prestige resounded throughout the western region. 300 people defeated the Duke's coalition army of 1,500 people at a very small cost, making the nobles of Longsong Stronghold lose the courage to resist. After the reward, Roland doubled the size of the 1st Army, increasing it to 600 people. And this time, when the recruitment list was released, the town's name filled the whole square. Roland still followed the idea that the People's Army was composed of the people, and selected 300 people with good qualities and no criminal records to join the 1st Army. The rest were all kinds of technical personnel. For example, in the smelting and firing industry, the number of people had increased significantly in the past month, from the original 20 people to about 400 people. Thanks to the furnace expert Lozia, the North Slope Furnace Group could not only produce red bricks, but also fire cement and glass. At the same time, 3 shaft furnaces were being set up, and soon, the ore placed in the yard could be first smelted in the shaft furnace, and then transported to the place where it was needed. As for education, chemistry, industry, and animal husbandry, these added up to less than 50 people, so from the point of view of population, Border Town still had a long way to go. However, the town, which was originally mainly composed of hunters and miners, could become like this in half a year. It could be said to be earth-shaking. Chapter 181. Genius 1 second. Remember, if you want to go? Talk Net, providing you with wonderful novels to read. After Barav left, Roland put the statistics table into the drawer and looked at Nightingale. He wanted to ask her what was going on, but after hesitating for a moment, he didn't ask. He had a vague answer in his heart, but this kind of thing was too embarrassing to say. If he guessed wrong, it would be even more embarrassing. Roland had to swallow these words into his stomach. Let's go to the North Slope mine. Want to see what kind of changes Soroya's new ability has brought? Although Nightingale's behavior had become a bit strange, her attitude was still the same as before. She took off her hood and said with a smile, "Let's go." Maybe I'm thinking too much, Roland thought as he looked at the witch who was walking quickly to his side. Riding the hot air balloon that day had affected far more than just 1 or 2 people. He had never thought that Soroya would actually become the second witch to have a qualitative change in her ability. In fact, even she herself hadn't been aware of this change. Roland also happened to discover this yesterday. Since he had given the hot air balloon as a gift to Anna, it had been placed in the castle courtyard. If anyone wanted to go up to the sky to see the scenery, they could just call Anna and Lightning. Until the day before, when it rained, Roland suddenly remembered that the rattan basket would become soft and peeling after being soaked in water. Even if it was dried, it would still reduce its toughness, so he thought of taking it back to the castle. He had intended to call the attendants to do this, but after thinking about it, the hot air balloon was a gift from him to Anna. Moreover, the rope and the airbag were easy to damage, so he simply decided to personally move it back to the castle. Love go, small say, Nekahi called Hummingbird to go to the vestibule, but the result surprised him. He saw that the basket was full of pictures. All of them were aerial views of the scenery of Border Town, but it was different from the previous pictures. This time it was as if her picture was standing up. Roland didn't care about the falling raindrops. He took a closer look and found that for the first time, her picture had a thickness. It was not strange for a painting to have a thickness. In theory, a real painting should have a thickness because the paint itself had a thickness. In oil paintings, this kind of thickness could even be used. Brushes, or scrapers could be used to create uneven textures. Through the changes in layers, the texture could be enhanced and the expressive power of the painting enhanced. However, Soroya was different. Her paintings were not drawn with pens and paint, but the manifestation of magic power. That was why the thickness created by the magic power was particularly strange. He still remembered that when he gently touched the protruding trees, it was as if he was really scraping the branches and green leaves. They were not hard and solid, but slightly soft and gelatinous. But when he touched the ground, it felt much harder, as if he was really touching a piece of stone. It was simply unbelievable. The rainwater flowed down the landscape painting, unable to soak into the vines at all. When he returned to the castle, he immediately called for Soroya, and Nightingale also confirmed this. Under the observation of the mist, the mana in Soroya's body was no longer in the form of a golden vortex like before. Instead, it had condensed into a constantly spinning ribbon. Walking into the courtyard of the Jean factory, Anna greeted him with a smile and gave Roland a big hug. Since they had made their relationship clear, she had obviously been more affectionate in front of him. Roland was in a good mood and rubbed her head. The silver hairpin on her hair shone in the sun. But he saw from the corner of his eyes that Soroya, who was also about to come over and bow, stood in place, not knowing what to do. Finally, she blushed and looked away, pretending not to see anything. Ahem! Nightingale pulled Soroya back to the table and deliberately asked loudly, "Did you paint all these?" Roland shook his head with a smile, let go of Anna, and walked over with her. He saw that the table was covered with Soroya's paintings, which were the scenery that could be seen in the courtyard. The only difference was the thickness of the painting. Some were only about a millimeter higher than the paper, while some were close to 3 centimeters. This was also the training content that Roland had arranged for her this morning, to test the maximum thickness of the magic-generated paint as much as possible. This is the thickest one? Roland touched the 3-centimeter thick painting with his finger. When he was enchanted with the blue sky, that part of the paint was so soft that it seemed to have no texture, but when he slid it down to the courtyard wall, he immediately felt a gritty friction. It seemed that it was really as he had guessed. After the evolution of the magic pen, the things drawn were not only consistent with the shape and color of the real thing, but even the touch was close to the real thing. It can be thicker, but after this thickness, the magic consumption will become very large. Soroya pointed to a brown protrusion on the table. I wanted to draw a tree outside the wall, but when I just drew a tree trunk, I used up half of my magic. So this is what you painted? Roland stretched out his hand and found that the paint was at least 10 centimeters thick. I thought it was really a standing piece of bark. Having said that, it was stuck to the table very firmly. The prince grabbed the bark with his hand and lifted it up until the 2 legs of the table were off the ground, but the bark was not separated from the table. Nightingale took out a dagger and cut it for a long time before she made a small cut at the bottom. This thing seems to be embedded in the table. In the end, it was Anna who cut it open. The black flame turned into a thread and swept across the table. The paint gave off a white smoke and fell to the ground. The cut was smooth but not smooth, and there were black burn marks. Roland picked up the fallen paint and held it in his hand, only to find that its weight was far lighter than he had imagined. Why did you suddenly think of changing the style of painting? No, I mean, how did you decide to fill the painting with thickness? He asked. I think it's probably because it's the first time I've seen such a landscape, Soroya said, recalling. When I looked down at the earth from the sky, I realized that the paintings I've made before, which you said were almost comparable to the photos of the real scene, were in fact not real. Especially after I painted the scenery in the basket, I felt that it was not real. She paused a little and slowed down her speech. The tops of the trees are pointed and will sway with the wind. The mountains are high and low, like the rising and falling chest. The rivers are embedded in the earth, and the ships go through them. This is the scenery I saw, not a thin flat surface. So I wanted to make the painting more real. I wanted it to stand up like these magnificent scenery. But I redrew it several times, but I didn't succeed. Just when I was feeling a little depressed, I suddenly remembered the little ball you mentioned. Little ball? Roland raised his eyebrows. Yes, she nodded with some embarrassment. It's the knowledge you taught us. I thought if everything is made of little balls, then is the painting the same? I tried a few more times. Imagining the painting with the magic pen as a colorful ball, they stacked on top of each other and finally formed a whole color. Then, the painting suddenly squirmed, the emerald green forest rose up, the dark green river sank, and finally became what you see. At that time, Anna and I were startled by this change. If you didn't mention it to me later, I would never have thought that it was the ability that evolved. I see. But compared to Anna's black fire, my evolved ability seems to have no other use other than to make the painting more vivid. Soraya stuck out her tongue. How could that be? Roland shook his head. In my eyes, it is not a simple painting. It would be too wasteful to only use this ability to paint. He remembered the scene of the rain sliding over the surface of the basket, but it could not soak into it. Rather than saying it was a paint, it was better to say it was a magic coating. To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to vote on it. Your support is my greatest motivation. For mobile users, please read it here. Chapter 182. As long as it could cover the surface of an object and form a solid continuous film, it could be called a coating. The coating itself could be gaseous, liquid, or solid, and its uses were also different. From the initial aesthetic decoration to the later protection of the object's durability, it could all be considered a kind of coating. Roland then carried out the series of tests. The results of the tests made him exceptionally happy. Probably because of the concept of, the longer the painting could be preserved, the better. It was already very difficult to completely remove her previous photo paintings without destroying the carrier, and after the evolution of her ability, this characteristic was raised to a new level. First of all, this kind of pigment with high adhesion and light weight showed two completely different physical properties. It could change the flexibility of its own material according to the painting object. For example, when painting the sky or clouds, it would be as soft as cotton candy, and it had a high resistance to stretching and shearing. When it was replaced with iron ingots or glass, it would become hard and brittle, and could be directly smashed with a hammer. In other words, due to the limited quality, its performance in the aspect of flexibility was far better than that of rigidity, which was also in line with Soraya's understanding of pigments. Secondly, no matter what kind of characteristics it showed, its chemical properties were very stable. Not only would it not react with dilute sulfuric acid or dilute nitric acid, but it also showed repulsion to water and oil. When he filled a cardboard box with paint with water, the thin bottom of the box did not show any signs of water seeping. After pouring out the water, the clear liquid beads rolled in the box, like dew on a lotus leaf. At this time, when he touched the bottom with his fingers, it still felt dry. In the high-temperature resistance test, after Anna dripped molten iron into the paper box, the paper as a carrier suddenly burst into flames, but the coating itself did not change much apart from being pushed open a little by the molten iron. It was not until Anna's black fire continued to heat up the coating that it began to melt and deform, at the same time emitting white smoke, and finally turned into a black gelatinous substance. What made Roland most excited was that this coating also had insulating properties. After covering the copper wire, it could be regarded as the enameled wire of the future. He used the simple direct current generator in the courtyard to prove this point. At this point, Roland had a complete understanding of Soraya's new ability. Unlike Anna's black fire, which surpassed green flame in every aspect, Anna's ability after her evolution was more like an expansion of her previous painting ability. Now, she could paint realistic oil paintings as well as thin photographs like before. It all depended on the thoughts in her mind, and both abilities could be used simultaneously. In addition, when drawing a thick scroll, if the thickness was controlled to less than 1 centimeter, Soraya could draw for several hours without stopping. Once it was more than 3 centimeters, the consumption of magic power would increase rapidly. After 10 centimeters, it would reach a threshold. Almost all the magic power in one's body would only be enough to draw 1 or 2 strokes. Of course, from another perspective, this was also the fastest and most effective way to vent when facing the bite of mana. It was still a summoning ability. Within the effective range of the god's stone of retaliation, the magic pen would suddenly disappear, and Soraya would not be able to draw a new pattern. However, the already drawn coating would not be affected by the god's stone of retaliation. Under the observation of Nightingale, there was no trace of magic power left on it. In other words, the substance produced by the magic pen was real. As for the use of the coating, there were too many. Soroya herself would never have thought that her new ability would bring so many changes to the town. This meant that Roland could quickly obtain a batch of water pipes coated with anti-rust materials, as well as a large bundle of enameled wire and even high-temperature resistant fireproof bricks. The originally unreachable 3 supplies project, water, electricity, and road, suddenly saw the light of dawn. At the same time, this also reminded him that personal experience was far more profound than the axioms in books. If the witches could see the microscopic world more intuitively, wouldn't it accelerate the process of their acceptance of the particle theory, thus triggering a new round of evolution? For example, a microscope that could observe the structure of cells and microorganisms. Roland felt that it was necessary to give it a try. North Slope Furnace Group. Blast! Let the fire burn brighter! Lozia shouted. Although he couldn't see what was inside the shaft furnace, with 3 carts of charcoal poured in, the iron and stones inside should have been heated red. When he was called to Border Town by a letter from Car Van Bate, he thought it was a desolate and barren place. If the letter didn't mention that the Mason Guild might be reborn here, he would not be willing to go to the border of the kingdom to resume his old trade. After temporarily leaving his family, he packed his luggage and prepared to leave. He was ready to eat porridge and live in a tent. As for the lack of manpower and money, that was a common problem during construction. Lezia also didn't intend to stay in Border Town for a long time. He wanted to see Carl, his old friend of many years, as well as his fellow stonemasons who were either exiled or living in seclusion. But the reality was always so incredible. After arriving at the town by boat, he met Car Van Bate at the dock, an outstanding mason in Greycastle King City and a strong competitor for the next leader of the Mason Guild. Compared to his appearance in Roland's memory, there was white hair at his temples and a few more wrinkles on his face. However, his body was not thin, but a lot stronger, and his face was even glossy. After greeting him, Car did not take him to the noisy and messy construction site. Instead, he led him to a obviously newly built residential building. He handed over a key and said, "This house is yours. Put your luggage down first, and let's go to the pub for a drink." Then Lozia heard a series of incredible stories from the other party. Car was recruited by the Lord to work in City Hall as a civilian. He became an official with a fixed monthly salary, and he was also the director of the construction department. If he stayed, he could also work in City Hall. He would get a free house. After 10 years of work, he could get a retirement allowance. What was a retirement allowance? Even if he did not work, he could still get money. Lozia thought that Car was drunk at that time, but he did not expect that what he said was true. "Sir, the ore is melting, and I see molten iron flowing." The worker at the top of the furnace shouted, "Open the slag outlet and discharge the slag." After getting to work, none of the problems that Lezia had envisioned appeared. Not only did the higher-ups give him people, they also gave him money. Moreover, they gave him money very quickly. Often after the application was made, he would get a reply the next day. In addition, there was also an alchemy material called cement, which could quickly bond bricks and stones, so the construction speed was improved by leaps and bounds. He felt a kind of unprecedented joy here. In just a month, Lozia built 5 furnaces with airbags and 3 shaft furnaces for smelting iron. The shaft furnace in front of him was the work that he had been thinking about for many years after he left the Mason Guild. He thought that it could only be passed down in the form of drawings, but he did not expect that it would become a finished product one day. This improved shaft furnace was nearly 2 meters high, and its inner diameter was about 75 centimeters. There were many air nozzles at the lower part of the furnace body, which could be used to blast and draw air. At the bottom, there was a slag outlet and an outlet for molten iron to flow out. Next to the shaft furnace, there was a slope made of sand and stones, which made it convenient for the workers to add materials and observe the situation inside the furnace. Today was the day that the first shaft furnace was officially put into use. Before opening the furnace, a smelting test had to be done according to the usual practice. After opening the slag outlet for more than 10 times and adding charcoal to the furnace 2 times, the test basically passed. There was molten iron in the furnace, and the slag outlet was unimpeded. The temperature at the moment was also enough to meet the smelting needs, so there was no need to continue to waste charcoal. After all, in order to reduce wastage, the first test used the waste ores in the corner of the yard. After opening the iron outlet to discharge the melted molten iron, Lozia announced that the furnace would be stopped. 2 days later, the townspeople who cleaned the furnace dug out a few dark stones. Under the high temperature, the other waste ores had shrunk several times, but these pieces of ores had not changed when they were first thrown in. Instead, their surface was brighter, and they were as black as ink. Lozia could not determine what kind of ore it was. He could say that it was useless waste ores, but its shape and appearance were really pleasing, and it did not seem useless. But if it was useful, how could it be made into a tool if it could not be smelted? After thinking about it, he simply picked out the most square-shaped ore, wrapped it in cloth, and asked his men to go to the castle and give it to the Lord of Border Town, Roland Wimbledon. Chapter 183. What is this? Nightingale looked at the shiny black stone on the table and asked. Obsidian. Roland didn't even raise his head, concentrating on drawing the blueprint in his hand. Black? What stone? No, I'm talking nonsense. He sighed, just looking at the shape and color. Who knows what kind of stone this is? He didn't study geological exploration. He may not be able to distinguish pure metal in front of him, let alone ores. The little knowledge he had in his head told him that ores were mostly complex compounds with different impurities and different colors. Take iron ores for example. Hematite, pyrite, and siderite, in terms of appearance, could be said to be thousands of miles apart. Pyrite, in particular, would sometimes show a light yellow metallic luster. It was often mistaken for gold, which was why it had the nickname of fool's gold. As for heat resistance, compounds have no fixed melting point. It is also related to impurities and composition, so it can't be distinguished by temperature alone. Moreover, metal elements exist in the ionic state. Without knowing the method of purification, it is useless to burn it. You also don't know something? Nightingale was surprised. There is a lot. Roland put down the quill and made himself a cup of black tea. Do you want a drink? No, she waved her hand. By the way, beef jerky is not as delicious as grilled fish. In the future you should put fish in your drawer. Roland was silent for a moment. He decided to pretend he didn't hear this sentence. He also planned to give this stone to the chief alchemist Kyle Sichi to deal with. Minerals more or less have a certain degree of radioactivity. It is not a good choice to put it in the office as a decoration. Recently, after the evolution of Soroya's ability, he found that he can suddenly make a lot more things. First is the tap water system, which can greatly improve the happiness of the residents. Think about it. After a busy day returning home sweaty, want to wash your sticky body, only to find that the water tank is empty, and you have to go to the nearby well to fetch water. This feeling must be terrible. Moreover, Roland was also very tired of the process of scooping water from the water tank to wash his face and hands. He always felt that if the water was left in the tank for a few days, parasites would grow. Not to mention that the water tank was rarely cleaned once a month. If he looked carefully, he could even see the accumulated scales at the bottom of the tank floating like caterpillars. If they used a water tower to supply water, there would not be any technical difficulties. They would use a steam engine to pump the water from the Redwater River into the water tower, and then rely on the siphon principle to flow through the pipes to every household, thus forming an automatic water supply system. The reason why Roland had never put it into practice was because of the materials. Water supply pipes were either made of iron or copper. If the iron pipes were not treated with anti-rust treatment, they would be scrapped after a few years. Copper pipes were the perfect water supply pipes. They were resistant to corrosion, did not form scales on the inner walls, were non-toxic, and even had the effect of sterilizing copper ions. But to use the metal used to make money as a water supply? The output of the North Slope mine was far from this level of luxury. Even in the future, copper pipes were only considered for high-end residences. At present, Border Town was not only unable to export minerals, but also had to import metal ingots. Therefore, whether it was iron pipes or copper pipes, Roland was reluctant to use them to create a water supply system that could not be used for profit. But now it was different. With Soroya's coding, it meant that he could use his magic to produce water pipes. For example, he could take an iron pipe as a mold, wrap it with paper, and then let Soroya cover it with the coating. After pulling out the mold, it would become a pipe. Even if such a pipe could not withstand pressure, as long as it was placed in a covered pipe ditch, it would be fine. Next was the power supply system. I'm afraid that in a short period of time there would be no way to popularize the whole town, but making the castle full of light was something that Roland had always wanted to achieve. Reading with a weak candle was too painful, and it also caused great damage to the eyes. Plus, summer was coming. What kind of feeling would it be to light torches and candles on a hot and muggy night? Now that there were generators and wires, it would not be so far before the castle entered the electrical age. As for the filament of the light bulb, he vaguely remembered that before the use of tungsten filament, people generally used carbonized bamboo filament to make incandescent lamps. Bamboo was not a rare thing. It could be found in the woodlands south of the Redwater River. However, what Border Town currently needed the most was an iron smelting facility. The output of iron was directly related to the scale of mechanical production and weapon manufacturing, and it was also the foundation of the town's survival. What you drew is a tower? Nightingale sat at the table and asked curiously. Almost, Roland nodded. But it is empty inside. It is used to fill fuel and ore. Its function is the same as a shaft furnace. It can smelt iron or into pig iron. This was an upgraded version of the ancient shaft furnace. He had been to the construction site of the shaft furnace designed and manufactured by Lozia. To tell the truth, apart from its small capacity and low temperature, the structure of the furnace was very close to that of a blast furnace. If it were not for Soroya's evolution, which gave the town the ability to produce refractory bricks, he would have built 10 more such shaft furnaces. But with refractory bricks, he naturally had to consider a furnace with a higher furnace temperature and a higher output. The height of the newly designed furnace was nearly 8 meters, 4 times that of a shaft furnace. The furnace body was tower-shaped, with a maximum internal diameter of 3 meters. In order to prevent collapse, there was a support frame at the bottom. The furnace wall was thin at the top and thick at the bottom. The belly was 1/2 meter thick, and the innermost layer was made of Soroya's brand-coated fireproof bricks. At the same time, it was equipped with a circle of air supply vents for the steam engine to pump air into the belly of the furnace. In order to make full use of the power of the steam engine, Roland also designed a set of automatic feeding equipment for the blast furnace, including a climbing rail and a special feeding cart with a movable door at the bottom. After the cart climbed to the top of the furnace under the traction of the steam engine, the buckle at the bottom of the cart would be hooked, so that the fuel or ore would be poured into the furnace. For this era, this system could be regarded as the top technology. Unlike the shaft furnace with a large opening and low heat, once the blast furnace was put into production, it would not stop for a long time. It needed a continuous supply of fuel and ore, and its output was much higher than that of a shaft furnace. As long as 5 or 6 such blast furnaces were built, the town's pig iron output would double. After drawing all the blueprints, Roland rubbed his numb wrists, took out a box from under the table, and pushed it in front of her. Nightingale was startled. "This is?" "I originally planned to give it to you earlier, but it took some time to carve the pattern. After all, I'm not very familiar with the machines in the factory." Roland smiled. "Open it and take a look." She reached out to open the box and couldn't help but let out a gasp of surprise. Inside, she saw 2 revolvers placed on both sides of the box. Different from the prototype used by Carter on the day of the competition, these 2 revolvers were shining with a silver light, and their surfaces were so shiny that it could reflect a person's shadow. The handles and the body of the guns were engraved with exquisite patterns, and the barrel was also printed with Nightingale's name, "To Veronica." This plan had been brewing in Roland's mind for a long time. Compared to the inconvenient and troublesome front-loading flintlock, the newly developed revolvers were already quite perfect. Whether it was safety or firing rate, they were all maintained at a relatively high level. For a witch with such high mobility like Nightingale, what kind of power could the guns display in her hands? He was looking forward to it. "Thank you," she smiled, picked up the 2 revolvers, jumped off the table and made a shooting posture. "Will you teach me how to use them?" Chapter 184. Scroll stood at the door of the bedroom and hesitated for a moment before she pushed the door open and entered. Vendi was sitting at the table with a sad face holding a book. She didn't need to look carefully to guess that the book must be Natural Science Theoretical Foundation. Scroll couldn't help but chuckle. She rarely saw her show such an expression. Even when the Witch Cooperation Association was trapped in the impassable mountain range and was short of supplies, she still smiled and cheered for each of her sisters, as if she had never worried about those hardships. She didn't expect that a book would make her so distressed. "You can't understand it at all, right?" Scroll said. "The first time I read a book, it was the same." "I thought it was Nightingale." Vendi heard the voice and turned her head. "What about now?" "I still can't understand it. Fortunately, you and I are the same." Vendi sighed. "Not to mention Anna, I didn't expect that even Soroya would comprehend a new ability. I feel that if I don't work hard, I will be surpassed by the younger generation. I really don't understand how His Highness knows so much. He can describe the invisible world as if it is real." "In fact, he doesn't know much," Scroll shrugged. "I mean in some aspects." "Such as?" "Such as Nightingale." She pulled out a stool and sat next to Vendi. "Have you noticed that her current behavior is very different from before? When protecting His Highness, she rarely hides her figure. Even when she goes out, she only wears a hood, and she even listens to the class at night. You live in the same bedroom with her, so you should know better than me. Can you tell me what happened in the end?" "In fact, it's nothing," Vendi shook her head. "It's her own choice." Her attitude made Scroll somewhat surprised. "Choice?" "Well, it's just as you guessed." Vendi closed the book and said bluntly. "She likes His Highness Roland Wimbledon, of course. This can be seen without guessing. The person who provides protection to the witches will, over time, gain the witches' favor. In the journey of the Witch Cooperation Association, this kind of rumor is not uncommon. That's a story made up by others. Most of the sisters didn't end up well. Prince Roland is different from them." Scroll was startled. She didn't expect that Vendi, who had held the same view as her not long ago, would say such a thing. "You know, witches can't give birth, and the prince can't. The prince will take a witch as his wife," Vendi said, spreading her hands. "Moreover, he told you himself." "How did she know? Could it be that Nightingale was there at the time?" Scroll suddenly understood something. "Are you blaming me for hiding it from you?" "No, Vendi, I didn't say it because I didn't want this matter to be leaked out. It would have a negative impact on His Royal Highness' road to the throne." Vendi was silent for a while before she said, "I know, I'm not blaming you, because I said the same thing to Nightingale. Before knowing this matter, I thought that the sisters wouldn't have a result, but since the prince doesn't mind, do we still have to force them to change their minds? Compared to Nightingale, who suppresses her feelings and is depressed, I prefer to see her like this. No matter what the final result is, at least she followed her heart." "So that's how it is," Scroll thought. Although she agreed with the idea of not spreading the news, she didn't want to stop the feelings of the sisters. She didn't want to arbitrarily make a choice for them. Unlike Kara, Vendi always looked from the sisters' point of view, cheering for their remaining courage. But does His Royal Highness know this? Scroll suddenly thought of a serious problem. What if his wish is based on not knowing that witches can't give birth? Well, Vendi also lowered her voice. "How about you go and ask?" Outside the western border city wall. The approaching summer sun shone brightly on the grassland, and in the distance, herds of cattle and sheep could be seen leisurely eating grass. It was hard to imagine that 3 months ago, this place was still covered with ice and snow, and there was nothing but terrible and ferocious demonic beasts. The shooting training had lasted for most of the afternoon, and the speed at which Nightingale mastered shooting skills was much faster than Roland had expected. Probably everyone has a different talent, he thought, and some people are born to fight. Now, her posture of reloading, aiming, and shooting was completely different from that of a novice. If she was born in a knight family, she would definitely become the top star knight in Grey Castle, Carter couldn't help but praise, just like me. Fortunately, she didn't. I don't want her arms to become as thick as yours. Roland glanced at him. How does it feel to fight an extraordinary to a draw? The moment I was hit, I even thought that I was fighting with a battering ram, and my whole chest felt like it was smashed, Carter said honestly. To tell you the truth, it was terrible. There shouldn't be a next time, he laughed. After another round of standing shooting, the prince applauded Nightingale. So far, it's very good. Next, let's do a simulation training. Nightingale put the pistol into her belt and walked to the prince's side. In the bright sunshine, the sweat on the tip of her nose sparkled. Do you see those targets? Roland pointed to the 5 half-body targets not far away. They have God's stones of retaliation hanging on them. You should be able to see them clearly in the state of fog. The next thing you need to do is to combine your ability with your gun and knock down these enemies in the shortest time possible. Because in the state of fog, objects in space were always changing, it was difficult to ensure that the bullets were flying towards the target. She had tried to shoot directly in the fog, but the result was that 9 out of 10 bullets rushed out of the fog and changed their trajectory, and 1 bullet almost hit Roland, who was standing behind her. Therefore, when shooting, Nightingale had to get out of the fog, and the shorter the time of exposure, the harder it was for the enemy to counterattack. Understood. She smiled, raised her cloak with one hand, and disappeared in front of the two. When the first gunshot sounded, Roland only saw a white figure quietly appear, followed by an eruption of flames and gas, and the target was smashed. Before the splashing sawdust completely fell to the ground, she had already reached the back of the second target and pulled the trigger at a range of 3 or 4 meters. Then the third target, the fourth target. Every time she shot, she was not even completely out of the fog. Apart from the silver pistol and the sudden flash of fire, Roland could not see any more details, and it was even difficult for him to catch her position with his eyes. Nightingale jumped in the fog as if she was teleporting. This kind of scene could only be seen in the movies. In the blink of an eye, the 5 targets had all been smashed. He blinked, and Nightingale returned to his side. "How is it?" she asked with a smile. Roland looked at the dumbfounded Carter and asked, "What do you think?" "I'm afraid no one can catch Miss Nightingale." Chief Knight took a deep breath, even if it's ashes wearing the God's stone of retaliation. "So, do I graduate?" She wiped the sweat from her nose and wiped it on Roland. Chapter 185. The Swan sailed westward along the Redwater River. May stood at the bow and looked straight ahead. She didn't want to enjoy the scenery, she just wanted to see the pier of Border Town as soon as possible. "How long until we reach our destination?" she asked impatiently. "Soon, Miss May. It's too hot here." "You'd better go back to the cabin and rest," Gates said behind her. She didn't need to look to know that he must be smiling ingratiatingly at the moment. Looking back, May found that it was true. "When you told me before it was already soon, and now it's still soon. Have you ever been to Border Town?" He was speechless for a long time, and finally scratched his head. "The last time I was here was 10 years ago. Long Song's stronghold can change its master in 1 year, let alone 10 years. May said angrily. "But there are exceptions. I don't think you've changed much. 10 years is the same as 1 day, and you still can't get on the stage." Seeing him retreating with a stiff smile, she finally felt a little better. If it weren't for the news from Irene, she really wouldn't want to go to Border Town with this group of acrobats. As the star actress of Long Song Stronghold Theater, she was quite famous throughout the Western region. This time, she was invited by the Tower Theater to go to Grey Castle to perform A Prince's Search for Love. The performance was a great success, and even the drama master Mr. Cajun Fells praised her for playing the role of the martyr princess. Although she wasn't playing the heroine, she left a deep impression on the audience. But when she returned to Long Song's stronghold in high spirits, she found that the place had changed dramatically. Duke Ryan was defeated and killed, and the stronghold fell into the hands of Prince Roland Wimbledon. Currently, Perot Hull of the Honeysuckle family was temporarily in charge. She had been away for less than a year, and the western region had become strange. Fortunately, the upper-class political turmoil has little impact on the theater. If that were the case, May and her sisters would only be able to talk about it a little after dinner. However, the news that the first knight of the western region, the Light of Dawn, has been captured suddenly grips her heart. May immediately rushed to the theater, wanting to find Irene to ask about the situation, only to find that she had also gone to Border Town half a month ago, probably to reunite with her husband. This news made May feel disappointed and a little envious at the same time. They both worked in the theater, but she was the well-deserved leading actress, while Irene was a newcomer who had not yet made a name for herself. The title of The Flower of Tomorrow only came from the mutual flattery of a group of miscellaneous actors. In terms of appearance, she was confident that she would not lose to Irene. In terms of family background, although she was from a common family, Irene was just an orphan adopted by the theater, so she was much better than Irene. However, it was difficult for May to forget that the Light of Dawn, Philin Eltek, had fallen in love with the naive Irene. Later, in order to marry her, he did not hesitate to give up the inheritance of the family. "Look, the farmland," someone shouted. "We're not far from Border Town." May looked to the left side of the ship and saw rows of knee-high wheat stalks swaying in the wind. Farmers wearing straw hats were busy in the fields, as if they were in a green sea. The wheat fields, accompanied by the sparkling river, extended westward as far as the eye could see. "This scenery is really beautiful, Miss May." Rosia came over and nodded to her. "I didn't expect that in this remote place we would be able to see vast farmland that is not inferior to Long Song's stronghold." "Compared to King City, this is nothing," May disapprovingly said. "In King City, the wheat fields can even connect the two cities. Along the way, there is nothing but wheat and more wheat. It's so boring." "Is that so?" She smiled awkwardly. "I have never been to such a far place." "Well, this is the reaction that an ordinary person should have," May thought. If Irene heard these words, I'm afraid that she would only show an envious expression and ask me to tell more. "Rest assured, you will have the opportunity to go in the future." "I hope so," Rosia patted her chest. "Thank you for your encouragement. I'm saying that you only need to spend a few silver royals, and you can hitch a ride with a caravan to King City. I'm not saying that you can also go to King City to perform in a play." May rolled her eyes in her heart. However, the other party was, after all, Irene's good friend, so May was too lazy to say all of these things. Rosia had joined the theater earlier than her, and was about the same age as herself. However, because of her plain appearance and poor memory, she had never been able to get the opportunity to perform on the stage. In addition to Irene, there were only a few people in the theater who were willing to pay attention to her. "Does Irene know that we will arrive today?" May asked. "I gave her a reply in the letter, and she should be waiting for us at the pier." "That's good," she nodded. "I don't want to look for a hotel alone in a strange town." "Can I ask you something, Miss May?" "Miss May," Rosia hesitated for a moment. "Why do you want to go with us to Border Town? Moreover, why do you want to hide it from the theater? Irene's letter said that there might be an opportunity to perform here, but you don't lack opportunities. If I told the truth, do you think the theater would let me come to this damn place?" May curled her lips. "As for why I want to come here, I just want to see how my theater companions are doing." She didn't know why she made such an impulsive decision. Long Song Stronghold Theater had a big play to perform in the next 2 days, and if she left now, she was afraid that the theater owner would have a headache. Although there were still a few backup actresses, without her, the nobles might not buy it, and if it was serious, they might even protest to the theater. To be honest, this was not a wise choice, May was very clear about this. No matter how big her reputation was, she still had to rely on the theater to survive. If she annoyed the theater owner, he would simply put her in the cold storage and try to promote a new actress, and she would have no other way. Either she compromised and admitted her mistake, or she could only leave this place and compete with the other theater's pillars. Otherwise, after seeing fill-in, should I immediately take a ship back to Longsong Stronghold? May thought. So that's how it is, Rosea nodded and said, when Irene sees you, she will certainly be very surprised. The scenery on the riverbank gradually became richer, and on the side of the impassable mountain range, there were many more tents and wooden houses. At this time, it was almost noon, and the farmers were busy cooking porridge and stewing soup. Smoke rose from the residential area, and May could occasionally smell the fragrance of wheat. Children gathered by the river to play, and those who were good at swimming would take off all their clothes, plunge into the river amidst the cheers of their companions, and then triumphantly climb up to the shore. May finally saw the long-awaited dock. After the Swan docked, Gate and Sam volunteered to take care of all the ladies' luggage. The group had just walked down the pier when Rosea excitedly shouted, "Irene!" May followed the direction of the other side's shout, only to see a woman wearing a white dress waving at them from the pier, and standing next to her was a tall man. Even though separated by a long distance, she could still see from his tall and sturdy figure that he was extraordinary. The Light of Dawn, Philin Eltek. You're tuning in to the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.